Welcome to Retro Radio Rumble, a podcast where we talk about retro video games and then rate them harshly. I'm Nierroh.
I'm producer Dennys.
And today we're going to talk about some of my favorite games, and they're of the RPG genre. Today on the docket we have Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VI, and Earthbound. And I am super stoked to talk about these. Like I said, RPGs, specifically the JRPGs, are some of my favorite. They're just like super close to my heart. I just love getting like lost in these grand stories and kind of like learning about the characters, and strategic turn-based combat. It's right up my alley. So I am very stoked for this episode.
Yeah, this is your genre specifically.
Definitely. So let's go ahead and get started, man. I think we're going to get started with a game, and I've said this a bunch, but I'm going to say it again. This game is one of the all-time greatest video games ever for the Super Nintendo and just of all time. Like, this game, once again, I'm going to ramble on because it's probably in my top 3 favorites, but that game is Chrono Trigger. And Chrono Trigger was developed by Square and released in Japan March 11th, 1995, and then August 11th in 1995 in North America. So this game, yes, developed by Square, and the development team was dubbed the Dream Team because it was made up of basically like the all-stars of Square at the time. So you had Hironobu Sakaguchi, which was the creator of Square's massively successful Final Fantasy series. Yasunori Mitsuda did the music, and we'll talk more about that later, but that dude's a rock star for sure.
Oh, yeah.
And then someone many of you know, Akira Toriyama, he did the character art, also famous for Dragon Ball, Dragon Ball Z, which, I mean, I grew up watching religiously, so I mean, it's just a complete all-star cast had created this game. Sadly, there's I mean, it's not a series. A lot of the JRPGs kind of follow a pretty strict series. You have the Final Fantasy series where there's 15 of them currently. Chrono Trigger has a sequel in Chrono Cross, which was released for the PlayStation, but that game is not so much a sequel as much as it is kind of like a spiritual successor, kind of, in a way.
Gotcha.
I mean, it's very loose. It's a very loose connection between the two games, so it's hard to really even call it a sequel. Something kind of interesting. We talked last time about the Satellaview, which I think I may have called it the Satellite View. We talked about it for the Legend of Zelda BS last episode. So it's actually Satellaview. It's the hook in for the Super Nintendo, where it actually broadcasts additional gaming content between a certain set of hours. So Chrono Trigger actually had a Satellaview broadcast as well, and it was called Radical Dreamers, and it was supposed to kind of be more of a direct sequel, but the developers actually didn't like it and kind of like wrote it off completely. They weren't proud of it. They didn't like it, but a lot of the stuff that came from Radical Dreamers ended up being used for the quote-unquote sequel Chrono Cross. So
all right,
it's a kind of interesting little tidbit there. So yeah, I mean, I feel like most of you listening to this probably know of Chrono Cross, but to summarize, you traverse through multiple time periods, making new friends and meeting kind of an eclectic cast, as is typical for the JRPG genre. But yeah, you're traveling through multiple time periods trying to ultimately stop the threat of Lavos, who's going to destroy the world as we know it, which is shown at the different parts of the game.
It also featured multiple endings, which was pretty big for that time as well.
Definitely. I think there's a lot that's kind of like revolutionary with that game. Like, one being the multiple endings. I mean, there's 13 different endings in that game.
Jeez.
Which is insane. Like, I don't know of anything before that had like the kind of like you have to get in the New Game Plus and play different ways to try and unlock multiple endings. I mean, that's crazy and adds a ton of replayability, which is amazing. So, that with like plot related side quests, like a real focus on character development, and then the unique battle system and detailed graphics. I think they like really just set it aside from the rest of the JRPGs of the time. And I mean, the Super Nintendo's known for JRPGs. I mean, that's why it's one of my favorite consoles, because I feel like it's truly like the JRPG system.
It is, and the cool thing about Chrono Cross is it's kind of more of an action JRPG. I felt like that one had more compared to the other ones that are very menu based. Despite this game is menu based, it felt more hands on, I guess you could say.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you felt that same experience compared to like a Final Fantasy game.
I mean, it has definitely the active time battle system that a lot of the Final Fantasy games have. But the way it did it was super unique, and I think we can definitely go into detail in the combat when we get to our gameplay segment of the review. But I would totally agree with you there. I think that this game, it just feels much more like actiony and active. You know, it really took that active time battle system and ran with it. So let's go ahead and start into our review process with presentation. So graphically, I think this is, if not the best looking game on the Super Nintendo.
Yes, I agree.
I mean, the sprites are so detailed and they're really big. Like the sprites are huge.
Well, that's what I really noticed was compared to a lot of the other games, the characters were very zoomed in, so you could get twice as much detail on there. And I like just how they looked in and out of combat.
For sure, man. I think another game on our list does this too, but I think that the battle sprites are the same as the world sprites.
Mm-hmm.
Which wasn't a common thing in like previous JRPGs, like the previous Final Fantasies. Like the battle sprites were much bigger than the world sprites,
Mm-hmm.
because it's easier to, kind of animate that, save space in the cartridge, all that good stuff. But
It
the
allows them
sprites
to
are
be more expressive.
definitely, and the characters are really very very expressive. Like they all like the emotions on the face, the pixel graphics are super spot on. Like, when your character's surprised, he like jumps up and makes a little, like throws his arms up in the air and opens his mouth. I love that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, we talked about Akira Toriyama, like he's just iconic, that he worked on the Dragon Warrior stuff before. So I mean, he has a history with Square and he did his own stuff with Dragon Ball. So I mean, he's just an amazing artist, and his character design for this game is super spot on. I mean, instantly recognizable with Chrono's spiky hair, that kind of Super Saiyan Toriyama look. So yeah, easy to say. It's just some of the best pixel art on the system. Atmosphere. I love the look and feel of this game. Like each time period really stands out. He uses I use different color palettes and kind of just different clever ways to set aside the time period. When you switch from present time to the first different time period you go to, which is in the past, like it swaps the color palette and it kind of puts like this layer of fog over everything to designate you're in a different time period. I mean, it's the same. You're in the same village that you grew up in, but just in the past, and they do a really good job kind of showing a distinctive difference. And every other time period for that matter, really stands out. Like the future where the world's been destroyed by Lavos is like, it's desolate and it's just destruction is everywhere, and it feels just like sad and empty. You come across like the poor human beings who are left like alive, and they're all in rags and starving. They're like hanging out in the Protodome, and it's like, oh man, like this is a bummer. But I mean, it goes from that, and then it kind of goes up to there's another timeline kind of before Lavos destroys the world, and that's Zeal, which is kind of like the prosperous future where in the skies, it's all the cities are built in the skies, and they're governed and ran by these like enlightened magic users, and it's just so like peaceful and nice. So yeah, I think they really nail the atmosphere. Kind of with the blend of sci-fi and fantasy.
Well, that's what I
really.
really thought was cool with that game was the setting was much different from any of their previous titles. You could tell that when they got the dream team, as you said, together, they were trying to create something brand new and revolutionary for the system that wasn't the same as other products they had out at around the same time frame.
Hmm. And kind of like funny thing about that is like features originally intended to be used in different games that we will end up being talked about is features originally intended to be used in Secret of Mana and Final Fantasy 4, which are also under development at the same time, were actually appropriated by the Chrono Trigger team.
Oh.
So yeah, Secret of Mana, which itself was originally intended to be a Final Fantasy game, was codenamed Chrono Trigger during the development because Secret of Mana was supposed to kind of have this like really grand idea of time travel, and because of the time crunch at the time, they weren't really able to fit all that in there. So Secret of Mana became the great game that it is now, and those
Mhm.
ideas were just repurposed for Chrono Trigger in a new project. So it's kind of funny that
That's
that
cool. That's
happened.
cool. Yeah, no, you can feel it that they wanted it to feel familiar to players who are a fan of the genre, but also to pull a different audience of people as well. I think with the super baller graphics.
Hmm. Definitely. I think if you're a fan of like JRPGs, this is kind of like the swan song, or this not
Eh,
not even the swan song, but it's just the epitome of all that is good in a JRPG. I mean, that might be just completely my opinion. I know a lot of people really love this game, and it's widely considered one of the greatest games of all time,
yeah.
As I'll say a bunch throughout the top of this list. But I mean, it is everything you can do right in an RPG game. They nail, you know, which will lead me to my next point with one thing that what kind of makes this one of my favorite JRPGs is the cast of characters. Like I am super character based. Like when I'm getting into a
Hmm.
story and into a game, the things that I really pay attention to are the characters. Like,
Hmm.
do I relate to them? Do I enjoy following their development? And I absolutely love like the cast of Chrono Trigger. Like all the party members and everyone are just I don't know. Like aside from Chrono, I mean Chrono does kind of the silent protagonist thing,
Understood.
so they can get you into the into the character. But
Hmm.
all the other characters, they have their own motives. Like my favorite character is Frog, who's the actual frog you meet, who um, he is out to seek vengeance for Cyrus, who was one of his good buddies. And not to spoil too much about his quest, but he's on a vengeance quest to avenge his buddy Cyrus, and he's after um, Magus, and his he talks in this kind of old knightly manner, and he wields the Masamune, which is like the magical all supreme sword that was created by this like extraplanar being, which I'm all about crazy magical weapons. Whenever you have like badass swords and everything
Yes.
like that, like super about it. So like Frog's just like the knight, and he has his righteous quest for vengeance, and I love that. And then Luca, which is the kind of the not the mad scientist necessarily. She's just like the girl genius. She invented the teleporters at the beginning of the game that kind of set the whole thing in motion, and she uses technology to do everything. So I just think they really nailed the characters. They're all really fleshed out with their own like purpose and motivations, and I just like loved hanging out with the cast of this
Yeah.
game.
Yeah, it's well done because the story, as convoluted as it can be, fundamentally is so sound. Even in the multiple playthroughs, they did a good job of varying what can happen. Like you said, with the settings, some settings that are dilapidated and the people are living in squalid compared to prosperous times. For 1995 to put into a game on the Super Nintendo like that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, there's just so much about the characters too. They each character has their own side quest, towards the end of the game. And I think a lot of modern RPGs have done that, where, towards the end of the game, you have to fulfill everyone's kind of duty.
Hmm.
But Chrono Trigger is one of the first games I remember, like, every party member has like a, a goal that at the end of the game, before you're about to confront Lavos and kind of like the final push of the game, the old man at the end of time, he'll tell you like, hey, like you should talk to your party members. I think they have some unfinished business, and you can go do a quest for everyone. And there's a specific side quest where you have to save a forest, and mechanically you get to use the time travel aspect of the game to kind of solve this riddle and save this forest. Um, but it's kind of just a side quest. It's not even that important, but at the end of this side quest, there is a scene where Luca kind of goes back in time. It's kind of like a dream sequence, and she's in her house, and she gets called by her mom, and she goes down the stairs, and her mom is kind of fiddling around with some of the machines that her and her dad are working on, because her dad's kind of her partner with the inventions and everything, and she gets caught up in one of the machines and starts sliding towards the machine, about to get maimed, because early on in the game, if you go to Luca's house, you can see her mom's bound to a wheelchair. So it's
Yeah.
like you get to see this scene where like your mom is literally getting pulled to be maimed by this machine, and if you enter the correct sequence of buttons, which in order to learn that sequence, you have to pay attention to some stuff earlier on in the game. And if you manage to remember that sequence and you input it the right way, then you actually stop Luca's mom from getting maimed by that machine,
That's
which has
awesome.
zero impact on the actual game itself. But at the end of the game, you'll see Luca's mom standing instead of like being bound to her wheelchair. So just stuff like that, man. It's like so full of emotion and depth, and it's not even like they didn't make it like in the forefront of the game to be able to experience those things, but it's just I don't know, man. I'm it tugs at my heartstrings when I get really like stuck to a character like that, and that's what makes a great game to me. When like I'm sitting there, I'm feeling the emotions of those characters. Like I feel Frog's vengeance story as he's going after Magus, and spoiler alert, when you actually do confront Magus at that point in the game, and Frog, he's ready to enact his vengeance. You get to choose. Like, do you leave Magus and continue onward, or do you let Frog like end Magus there?
Yeah.
And it's just so emotional and so heartfelt, and every character has that feeling in this. So 10 out of 10. 10 out of 10 for me.
I know your thoughts on it.
Yeah, do you have anything more to say about like presentation, anything about like the characters, the atmosphere, anything about that?
So I don't have as much hands on as you with the Chrono series, but yeah, no. From what I have played of it, I do enjoy what they have done, because I do feel like it is an A+ version of that style of game. But yeah, no, the presentation's cool. The story is very unique. Like you said, the characters are well developed. That game is always held in the highest of regards as far as just JRPGs of all time. So I
Right
agree
on.
with you.
10 out of 10. So I think last episode we were giving number ratings at the end of all these sections, and we decided it's a little arbitrary, seeing as how we're playing all these like masterpiece games. So we're gonna do away with the number rating at the end of these. You may hear a few numbers thrown out there, like to kind of take home the point of how we really feel about these. But yeah, we're not gonna formally be doing the number rating anymore. We're just gonna keep kind of placing these on our list at the end of the episode. So
Yes.
um, well, moving on then to gameplay. So genre, this is a JRPG. All these games today are JRPGs, so they kind of, they all fit that standard format. They all kind of conform to that.
Mm-hmm.
So I felt like we could talk kind of more about the things that really set those games aside in that format. And I think talking about combat is a really good way to kind of see how those games set themselves apart in gameplay. Because I mean, these aren't games with like tight controls and jumping and platforming.
Right.
So I felt like talking about the combat would be the good way to kind of convey that. So with Chrono Trigger, combat wise, I mean, it uses the ATB combat system,
Mm-hmm.
which is very widely used in the Final Fantasy series. But they do that in such a unique way. So they have the typical, attack the enemy, use magic, but they have what is called the tech system. And as you level up and learn new abilities called techs, techs can either target a single enemy or techs can hit multiple enemies by like striking a line across the battlefield or by hitting all enemies kind of in like a single grouped area. And that creates this kind of strategic use of techs based off like placement, which is really fun. Like, if you wait for those enemies dancing across the screen to kind of line up, like, oh, now is my time to shoot this like tech
Mm-hmm.
through them. Like it just adds this depth. That creates this more like it has more of a real-time actiony vibe like than the typical kind of turn-based ATB system in a lot of the Final
Mm-hmm.
Fantasies. And I think that that's just really fun and satisfying.
I totally agree with you. In fact, this one I thought probably has the best fighting in the JRPGs as far as on the Super Nintendo, the ones I've played, just because of its being stylish and having a little bit of strategy involved. I know the time-based system in the Final Fantasy involves some strategy as well, but having the characters move on the screen, I thought was like a nice addition to it. Instead of, I mean, even if you go to like the Pokemon style where there's no timer, that one's very at your own pace. So
Hmm.
this one I thought was kind of cool. Like I said, I thought they got in the boardroom and decided to make this a more commercially appealing JRPG style for the American audience.
Hmm. I could see that for sure. Um, so another satisfying mechanic surrounding the techs that I really enjoy is the double and triple techs. So certain characters actually learn dual techs with each other. So, like for instance, Frog and Chrono have X slash, where as soon
Mm-hmm.
as they both level up high enough to learn their respective techs, you can execute a double tech. And during the ATB meter, when it's each character's turn to attack, you can, instead of doing the individual moves, you can execute a dual tech, and that's both the characters will move at the same time and do an extra strong attack, either combining the elements of each character, because each party member kind of has their own set of elements.
Mm-hmm.
There's still the aspect of a little bit of the rock paper scissors mechanic, as is in many JRPGs. So you can combine those kind of elements to create these bigger and better attacks. And to take that a step further, there's triple techs, and some of the cast can even learn like triple techs together and create these like super insane like mega moves that uh, they're expensive to use, but they're just huge and they combine so many different aspects of the attack. And it's just so satisfying when you get like the party together that you like and you're
Yeah.
attached to all the characters and they all work together. And I think like even the Super Nintendo cover art of the game, which is that really awesome like Kira Toriyama
Mm-hmm.
cell, has like a picture of like the tech happening. It has Marley, doing her magic attack with like Frog and Chrono all like attacking at once. Like it shows off. They're kind of like they were gearing you up for this like all guys attacking at once, which
Mm-hmm.
kind of goes off to that action thing that Chrono Trigger did.
That's pretty cool to add depth to how you put your party together in order to achieve higher techs. That
Mhm.
is a really cool aspect.
And every party lineup is viable. Um, Definitely, I don't think you're really forced to use any specific party member at any certain time. I think you could kind of just use whichever party members you like. I mean, as they come available,
Mm-hmm.
when you first get thrust off um, into the past, you only have yourself, and then eventually Luca, and then you meet Frog. So, but yeah, you're really just encouraged to use whatever like characters you like. They're all viable. None are more strong than the others. There is an elemental affinity for each, and every one of them can use magic. Whenever you recruit a character, you take them to the end of time, which is kind of a little hub area, and you take them to meet. I want to say Sepio. Sepico is this kind of shape shifting monster that hangs at the end of the time that you can test out your metal against him, and if once you bring a new party member to him, will teach them the magic that they're innately able to cast. So It's pretty cool. You know, all of them can learn magic, which is cool. You don't just have like your physical guy, your magical guy. And
Yeah,
sure enough, you know, there's certain affinities. Like Chrono's going to be your more physical guy, or Luca is kind of more straight up magic. But they can all use magic, and they're all viable, which I think is really cool. Yeah, aside from kind of the unique combat system, I mean, it has all the other pretty typical tropes. I mean, you have you know, equip better and stronger items, you know, find kind of the secret items to make yourself even stronger,
mm-hmm.
level up to increase your strength. So it has all the typical RPG tropes in
Mm-hmm.
that sense. It just does I think it does the best and most exciting combat system of the time for a JRPG.
Agreed. It feels like a version made to appeal to more of a larger audience.
Hmm.
So I thought they nailed it because fundamentally their sound, I think the complaints back in the day maybe were just that for the younger audiences, and maybe it was a little bit, bland with the menus.
Hmm.
But this one was definitely the most visually stunning.
Hmm. And in some of the other ports of the game, because this game's been ported multiple times. I mean, you can get it on the DS, which is, in my opinion, the quintessential way to play
All right.
because they move the menu to the touchscreen, which even clears it up and streamlines it even more.
Jeez.
And you can also play it on mobile, which it plays okay on mobile. It's if that's the way you have to play it, for sure play it on mobile. But I think the DS is the definitive way, and it kind of makes the controls just all that much better. And like you get the full screen, like you get to see the whole background and all the enemies without any of the menu cluttering up the screen at all in the DS version. So I think
Oh,
that's really cool.
that's awesome.
Um, yeah, another few general gameplay things I really like. No random encounters. That's a huge thing for me.
So that was my big gripe when I was younger with the genre in general, man. Random encounters is rough. I did enjoy Final Fantasy 6, but the random encounters is tough in it.
Yeah, random encounters are always just a little tough to swallow. It's like I just want to go to that place over there, and like I don't want to have to grind on my way there.
Or if you think you see a treasure or something in the corner and you move up and it's not, and then you move back one space and then you have to fight again.
Yeah,
It's so
especially if you're in a
rough.
bad way, you know, like I'm
Oh,
dying right
jeez.
now. Yeah, so no random encounters is a huge plus for me. Like I love that you see the enemies on the screen and like
Yes.
you can actually choose to run away from like a lot of the fights, you know, you're not stuck fighting every single thing you come across.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I think that's really cool. This game does not feel grindy at all. I think this is a game you can get through 100% without grinding, which I know a lot of the JRPGs of the time were very, very grindy, and it can be hard for some people to feel like, you know, in order to progress in the game, I just have to run around and battle for like a few hours before I can go beat this boss and progress. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that like grinds the pacing of the game to just a straight up halt for some people, and it really gets people to give up, you know, and they don't
Mm-hmm.
want to continue going. So the fact that this game like never feels grindy, I think, is a huge bonus. It's just an easy to play game.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was a good move on their part to make it not grindy because there's a lot of, I mean, even in the Final Fantasy genre, tons of grinding.
Hmm. For sure. Another mechanic I really enjoy is the time travel mechanic. I love that you can use that time travel mechanic to solve some of the side quests at the end of the game. Because towards the end, you actually unlock the epoch or epic, however you pronounce that, which is your time travel machine, and it can fly you all around the world map, and it can take you to all the different time periods that were before then only accessible by little kind of tears in time. Um, and you can use that time travel mechanic to solve some of the side quests, which I think is really clever when you have to think about, um, you know, like I'm stuck. Like how do I deal with this? Like there's a part in the game that really sticks out for me for the time travel aspect is you need to get a specific item from this lady in I think she's your current time period, the one that you were alive in, and her family is like really selfish, and she is only going to give you the item for like an exuberant amount of money or something like that. Like not even maybe she won't even give you the item, but in order to get her to give that up to you, you in that same village he lives in, there's a vendor who sells you beef jerky. Of all things, jerky. This is what you buy. So you buy the jerky and you go back in time and you talk to the lady and she notices you have the jerky and she's like, hey, will you sell me the jerky? And you can choose to sell her that jerky, or you can choose to give it to her just like pro bono, like, here's the jerky, like, you take it, go ahead. And she'll comment and she'll be like, wow, like, that's so selfless of you, like, from now on I'm going to teach my family to be selfless. So then in the future, when you go back, well, the lady, now her family's generous and they're willing to help you out and give you the item that you're trying to find.
I mean, that's awesome.
So I love that. Like, the kind of like puzzle solving there is really cool.
That is cool, and it's neat that they let you go back and do that with all the characters. It kind of reminds me of one of your favorites, Mass Effect, like Mass Effect 2. Before you're going into the final battle, how you can kind of make amends with most of the characters to ensure their survival.
Mm-hmm,
I don't know
definitely.
if that's a spoiler or anything.
Nah, I don't think that's really a spoiler from Mass Effect 2.
Kept it light.
We've all been happy and angry about that series. So I'd like to talk a little bit about goals for each of the game too, kind of how they like set the pacing of like what the quest is. And I think the one word to describe the goal of Chrono Trigger is epic. Like, it's truly epic. It starts off so small and then builds to this like grand scale. So to kind of summarize, you start off as just like regular boy. You wake up in your mom's house, and your cat's hanging out there too. Like, you're just a dude. And she's like, oh, are you gonna go, meet your friend Luca at the Millennial Fair? And you're like, yeah, I guess so. So like, you run over to the Millennial Fair happening in your village, and you bump into this girl, and you bump into her, and she loses her pendant, and you can check on her or go pick up her pendant and give it to her. And you actually have to pay attention to that because there's a whole really awesome thing about the Millennial Fair that we'll talk about later too. But you bump into her and you end up talking with her, and she's like, hey, like, I don't want to experience the fair all by myself. Do you want to hang out? And you being the silent protagonist, which have no choice in the matter, you hang out with Marley. Is you go have fun at the fair, and you eventually make it to Luca, who's showing off her new teleporter invention, where it just kind of teleports objects from point A to point B. And Marley, being the kind of whimsical soul she is, goes in to try out the teleporter, and it reacts with her pendant that she has that you helped her recover at the very beginning. And it sends her through this portal. And since you are the young hero, you jump into the portal after her and try to save her. And when you jump into that portal, you end up back in the very same spot, just, back in time. And it turns out that the girl, Marley, is actually Princess Nadia. Spoiler alert, sorry. And she is a descendant of the royal family, and the monarchy of this time period has mistaken her for the actual queen because the likeness is so, is just so freaking, identical. So you're going through and trying to rescue her, and you have to go rescue the actual queen from, the fiends, where you meet Frog and kind of set up on that adventure. And at that point, all you're trying to do is rescue this girl, which then leads to this quest to go confront the Fiend Lord, who is, waging war against the humans of this time. And like, that's all at the beginning of this quest. Like, oh, I'm just going off to save this girl, and then I got to confront this evil bad guy. And then the quest it keeps expanding. Like, well, actually, the evil bad guy is trying to summon this thing called Lavos, which is going to end up destroying the world. So you go to the different time periods, like in the future, and like you see what the desolation left behind of this Lavos was, and you meet your more party members, and it's just the scope of the game just continuously gets bigger and bigger and bigger, kind of like an epic like fantasy storybook. Mm-hmm. And I think it does such a good job in the pacing with like getting bigger and grander. Like, it's like the word I said earlier, it's just truly epic.
It's done like an action Hollywood film.
Yeah. And then on top of that, you just have 13 endings to go through. So if you you stick this game out and you get all the way to the end, you have 13 different ways to end it. So yeah, I love.
linear path that most people take the very first time they play, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't really split off too much. I mean, you can, once you get to the point to where you can confront Lavos, like you shouldn't, but you can, and you can get like kind of like the bad ending. And also, we'll talk about some more spoilers here for those who haven't played this game. Shame on you, by the way, if you haven't played this game. But if you haven't, plug your ears. There's a point where you confront Lavos for the first time, and he actually kills Chrono, and you have to go through this whole ordeal, this like, kind of like whole side quest to revive Chrono so that he gets back, and then you can confront Lavos with him. But you can actually just go beat the game. Like you can
weird.
just leave the main character. Like how many games can you just like dip the main character? Like you know what? Like whatever. Like I didn't like him that much, and just like maybe you don't really even know better, right? Like you think that's what you need to do is just kind of like keep pushing, and then maybe you'll find him, right? So, I mean, the game doesn't necessarily tell you exactly how that should be done. So, you can complete the game without saving Chrono. And then after the end sequence, he'll end up showing back up, and there will be a reunion between him and Marley, and it's very touching. So, that's just one of the many, many endings you can get. Yeah, there's another ending where you get to meet all the developers of the game. They all kind of talk to you as little sprite versions of the developers, and they'll say something cute.
Jeez, it's so funny.
Yeah, so I love this game. Very big fan. If I haven't said that before.
Yeah.
Cool, man. So let's move on to the music, which once again, so freaking good. This was composed by Yasunori Mitsuda. And he did default a little bit to Nobuo Uematsu, and that's kind of an interesting story. So Yasunori Mitsuda, who I think the Chrono Trigger series and just the Chrono series in general is his kind of claim to fame, but he wrote most of the music before falling ill. And he actually worked so hard and so tirelessly on the soundtrack that he developed a stomach ulcer, and it made it so he could no longer continue work on this game. So I mean, he basically like almost finished it, but then when he got too sick to move forward, Nobuo Uematsu, who we all know and love, and he did the soundtrack to another big game on this list and to pretty much all the Final Fantasies. He's a genius in his own right. He helped finish it up. So I mean, huge players in the soundtrack here with Nobuo Uematsu and Yasunori Mitsuda, and just like a testament to the work on this soundtrack, considering Yasunori literally worked himself sick on this music. So yeah, I mean it's one of my favorite soundtracks in JRPGs and in like honestly all of gaming. I think the music is very, very important for JRPGs because you have such grand set pieces and you really need the music to kind of help drive in the mood and the atmosphere. When you're going through the story and you have those tense moments. So I think it's super important to have really strong music. And I think Yasunori Mitsuda really understood that, and he poured his heart and soul to try and like convey the emotion of those scenes with the sounds. He uses such like a kind of a broad spectrum of sounds. Like he has like happy party music that's just so light, and then he has those like grand emotional set pieces that really
cool. Apologies. It's cool because the way that you can tell different time frames too by the motif that is applied to them. I thought was really cool. Like when he goes back in time, it has like a whimsical feel musically compared to present day or even the dilapidated future.
Yeah, I think they nailed that. They really cemented you're in a different spot now by like changing up the soundtrack and just kind of like you said, it's more whimsical when you go back in time, where it's kind of a more like knights in shining armor sort of vibe,
Yeah.
And then getting into the future, to have kind of the more like sci-fi-esque sound. Like he really has a huge it's just a huge brand of like style and genre, like all throughout the soundtrack. It's kind of all over the place, and I love that. We definitely can't talk about the music of Chrono Trigger without talking about Robo's theme. And Robo's theme is basically Rick Astley It's like straight up, like that dude was just kind of like bumping some Never Gonna Give You Up as he was like thinking about Robo's theme. So as Robo is introduced to you, it just has that like terribly 80s just like pump going on. So I mean, +1 for being able to straight up like sneak a Rick Astley vibe into your JRPG soundtrack. Like that's brave, and that's awesome.
That's pretty hilarious.
Yeah, do you have anything more to talk about for any of those points before we move on to like rating and legacy and all that?
No, I mean, I agree with you with a lot of the stuff. I mean, on the old retro MIDI sounds, it's crazy how you can get such diversity. And I think you said like just the guy worked himself into a sickness, and then it's completed by the legend of Final Fantasy music. So, but yeah, I thought, like I said, it all comes down to they wanted this game to be a big title, and I mean, across the board, musically, graphically, gameplay wise, story wise, in every sense of the ability, they really achieved a grand scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I think this game just left a huge legacy. I mean, I hate saying it, but I'll say it again. Considered one of the greatest games of all time. Like games, not just JRPGs, but games on any system. And I think this game, after I've replayed this game a handful of times now. Like, it being one of my favorites. Like, I've gone through this game quite a bit, and it's always fresh. Like, this is a game that I can 100% say, like, this game could have released today, and I would feel like it was brand new. Like, it's so amazing, from like the graphics to everything. Like, it's just such a great game that I feel like it will stand the test of time. Like, you want to stick this game in like a time capsule for like the future. You want to shoot this game into space to show people like this is what video games are like on Earth.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, no, I mean, you have to give it a high score just because of the legacy of it and the influence it's had on future titles.
For sure. So yeah, this game had a huge impact on me. I love the characters. I'm so emotionally invested in this story, and this will always remain one of my favorite games. I don't think there's too many comparisons at the time. I mean, there's tons of RPGs on the SNES, and I do think this stands above a lot of them. I mean, there's some contenders on this list for sure. Being the RPG system, there's some great ones. In my opinion, though, this kind of stands above all of the turn-based RPGs. And it did leave. It definitely left a legacy in the sense that there's some games I can think of that kind of mirror the Chrono Trigger vibe. Radiant Historia on the DS. Took the time travel mechanic and kind of has the Super Nintendo pixel art vibe. And then a few years ago, I Am Setsuna released on the Switch, and I think also on PC, and that also has a very Chrono Trigger vibe. It used the combat system from Chrono Trigger.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like it had a lasting impression and even left itself up to being copied years later. So I know we weren't going to say number ratings, but I'm just going to yell 10 out of 10.
Yeah.
That might be my running joke now. I'll just yell 10 out of 10 after every review.
Well, you have a lot more hands-on with it. You've beat it multiple times. I don't necessarily have the nostalgia with the title as you. There's definitely some Final Fantasy titles in the same JRPG genre that I might hold a little bit higher, and maybe it's just I need to put more time into Chrono Trigger. But I do agree that with everything that I've seen in the game, that it is a 10 out of 10 game, though.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Well, with that, let's move on to our next game. The next game on our list today is going to be Earthbound, which this is a very wacky game. Wacky is my word to describe Earthbound, and I think you, Dennys, have kind of more invested in this game than I do. I enjoy this game, but I think this is more your speed for sure.
Well, absolutely, because when I was a youngster, a lot of these games were coming out on the SNES when I was in 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade. But this game came out. I was too young at the time for some of the Final Fantasy titles, the Chrono Trigger we were talking about, but they started running ad campaigns in Blockbuster, I believe was, and they were saying this game sucks and it's coming out and you should check it out because it's just like a terrible game. And I was like, what a weird ad campaign. So I started getting a Nintendo Power magazine or Game Pro magazine, one of the two. I was reading about this game that was kind of a simplified version of an RPG. I always wanted to play those because my friend's older brother would always be playing RPGs. And I wanted to get into that genre, but I was too young at the time. So this one was the first one that I was like, I'm going to do the preparation. So I waited, and when Blockbuster came out, they actually gave you the giant booklet that came with it. And I studied the booklet. And back then you could rent a game, and when you returned it, you could be like, hey, can I renew this for another term? And so I got invested in the game. This would be one of the first RPGs that I actually got into because I felt like it was designed to bridge the gap from adolescence to adulthood when it came to RPG style games, menu-based, turn-based fighting games from back then. That wasn't Pokemon. Pokemon was very elementary. This was like kind of like that next step up, but not quite Final Fantasy.
I really
So
like how you put that. I've never really thought of it that way. I definitely know this game was supposed to be a sort of satire of the
yes,
RPG genre, but that's a good way to think about it. I haven't really thought of it as kind of bridging the childhood and the adult aspects of the RPG genre. So that's cool to hear.
well, and that theme is deeply embedded in the story, in every fiber of the game itself. A person transitioning from childhood into adulthood. Because if you think about the quest Ness goes on, who I think gained popularity through the Smash Brothers game when people
Hmm.
started being like,
That's my history with NES. So I didn't actually play Earthbound as a kid. Earthbound was obscure enough for me that I didn't get into it until much later on in life. And so my first introduction to Earthbound was NES from Super Smash 64. So
yeah.
I'm one of those.
Well, it was one of those weird titles where it came out in Japan, and then they essentially remade the game more or less for the American audiences as a different title or like a second title. So instead of it was Mother in
Hmm.
Japan, and then became Mother 2. I mean, this one essentially is an extended version of the first game
Hmm.
with the updated graphics, and then trying to appeal to the Western audiences.
Hmm.
And it's funny because it gains a lot of I guess, acclaim for the fact of how they satire America in the game. It's a Japanese culture's look at what they think American culture is, which is kind of funny because there's a lot of Americana with baseball. I mean, the main theme of the game is a boy with a baseball bat who also has, telekinetic powers. But yeah, no, it was a really cool concept at the time, and it was a game where I could jump into it as a kid and be able to play it where I didn't feel like it was too advanced. And I still don't feel like playing it later in my life. I don't feel like it's a very advanced game. It's not made to, I don't think, discourage you or to be a humongous challenge.
Yeah, mechanically, there's nothing too crazy about it. It's kind of no frills, turn-based combat, and
Yeah.
go talk to the characters, find out what's going on, and move forward. So I mean that's a great summary of the game. Like you said it perfectly. To go into some history of this game, it was created by Shigesato Itoi, which he's actually a well-known Japanese Renaissance man. And
Oh,
when I say Renaissance man, I mean this is a man who is a kind of a celebrity in Japan and was kind of acclaimed for being talented in many facets. Like he was a voice actor. He had some voice work in My Neighbor Totoro. Extremely popular Studio Ghibli movie. He also was like an essayist and a lyricist. Also, he was a judge on Iron Chef in Japan because their
oh.
celebrities get to be judges on Iron Chef, and that's a cool thing to do. So before even working on Mother, this dude was a celebrity. So it's cool when like your national hero decides like I'm gonna go create a video game. So being the well-liked public figure he was hanging out playing Dragon Warrior, which is another older Nintendo era JRPG, and decided that I think I can do better. I can make a better RPG. So he went and pitched his idea to Shigeru Miyamoto, the godfather of Nintendo, the creator of all things good and amazing. And Nintendo and Shigeru were kind of used to like celebrities pitching them ideas at this point, kind of using their celebrity status to kind of get ideas by. And he didn't like Shigeru Miyamoto didn't really like that. Like he actually shot down Shigesato Itoi at first and didn't really like his idea. So in an interview, Shigesato Itoi actually says Shigeru Miyamoto like made him cry. Like he went home that night and like cried because Mr. Miyamoto, the hero of Nintendo, is like, no, I don't like your idea. So poor dude didn't really get any traction there. So he decided to create his own development studio, which was called Ape Inc. Because he's a celebrity, he has the money and pull to do that. So he creates Ape Inc., who started work on Mother 1, as it's known. This is the Mother series, if you will. There's 3 games, Earthbound being the second. I mean, if you count it that way, Mother 1 was the first kind of iteration of this, and it actually came out on the Nintendo in Japan, not the Super Nintendo, and it never made it to America, and it was kind of a crap game, I think.
Yeah.
It was, it was talked about, and so they actually ended up bringing in HAL Laboratory, which, and being a Nintendo subsidiary at the time, working closely with many Nintendo releases. So HAL Laboratory took his game and then recoded it from the ground up. They're like, this sucks. We're gonna help you with it. And the actual head programmer who worked on it was none other than Satoru Iwata. And he was a programmer at HAL Labs at the time, who ended up becoming the president of Nintendo. Jeez. For a while until his death. He actually tragically has since passed, but yeah, I mean, he had a huge hand in this game. So I mean, that's pretty amazing when the to be president of Nintendo recode your game. So that's pretty cool. So obviously it did end up getting some traction, and it ended up getting developed with help from HAL Laboratory, and finally getting released in Japan in 1994 as, Mother 2, and in June 5th, 1995 in North America as Earthbound. So it just kind of has a really interesting development there. It's just such an interesting series. I think diehard fans of the genre, use emulators to play 1 and 3, but kind of because of that, like how weird the development was, and because of it not being released, I think it's created this like kind of cult sort of following of this game. I think that's really cool when a game kind of gets underground popular, and I love that. I'm a sucker for stuff like that. So
yeah, I like it's a reverence. It almost is making fun of everything. And it's weird. It's one of the games that breaks the fourth wall as well. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of cool. I was into the old Far Side comics, and I felt like a lot of the humor in this game reminded me of Far Side or like Rocko's Modern Life. It kind of has that type of goofiness to it, but also still has some relatively adult themes.
Definitely, man.
So it was kind of a cool title in that sense. And I believe originally it was going to be called Spacebound, but they were afraid that it was going to confuse audiences, that a majority of the game in the beginning doesn't take place in space. It takes place on the planet. So they thought that people would get turned off by that. So they named it Earthbound to not confuse audiences.
Cool. So let's move on to our review process. So presentation, graphics specifically. This game, and I'm going to use the word mundane. I think mundane is the word to describe the presentation of this game. And I don't mean that to say like mundane in a bad way, but I mean they use that as a tool. So like you're a normal like human boy in a normal human city, you know, and like it's you wake up in your parents' house, and like there's your sister and your dog and your mom, and you never actually see your dad. That's like a thing in Mother, which is why it's actually called Mother. I think, well, one of the reasons why it's called Mother is because you never actually see your dad in the game. You just talk to him on the phone and he puts money in your bank and tells you to save, which is hilarious. But it's just, it's so mundane, you know, like, hey, you need to heal, like go to the hospital. Like, oh, you need to buy some stuff? Like, there's the drugstore, you know, like the items you equip are a baseball bat, a yo-yo, a frying pan.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just mundane, you know, mundane and absurd is the other
Mm-hmm.
word, because they definitely wanted to, I don't know, they wanted to throw you for a loop. They wanted to have that, you know, Far Side comic book kind of sense of humor. And I mean, they nailed that. Like, this game has some humor that is like roll on the floor laughing. Like, it's just so weird in the best way. So I think the graphics do really, they show that, you know, like there's nothing special about it. Like none of the sprites or anything necessarily pop out. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
just, it's plain. Um, but then it totally flips on its head with, you know, as soon as you go into combat, you get the little screen swirl, and then like combat is like a psychedelic, trippy background. You know,
Yeah.
like you're facing the enemy sprite. It kind of has like that almost first person look at the sprite, and the background is just trippy psychedelic noise, which
Mm-hmm.
is crazy. Um, so yeah, I mean, so goofy. Such a goofy game. I will say, even though like kind of the character sprites and like the backgrounds are all like kind of plain, I really like the enemy sprites. Like I like
Yeah.
how they personified like fire hydrants
Yes.
and
And cabs.
yeah, in a cab, and like non-assuming like city man is one of the enemies, or
Yeah.
new age retro hippie is another enemy, and it's just the hippie with like a bandana and a big old beard, and he's an enemy that you fight.
It's
So
so funny.
so that's crazy. It's just they complement the absurdity of everything for sure.
Well, I think they're goofing on the randomness of like Final Fantasy games where you fight some random things sometimes. You know, you're in the water and you're fighting like fish person, and you're like, what? I don't even have any beef with this fish person. Like, why is he fighting me? You know?
Beefy.
But like you said, the mundaneness, I think, kind of pioneered the way to games like Undertale, which is also
Dude,
incredibly
definitely.
mundane. But I think they do that intentionally. I think, and this is a personal opinion, but on the Earthbound, you almost wonder if they did a super mundane childlike view. Like you're being attacked by police officers, you're being attacked by a taxi cab, you're being attacked by a hippie, random things, and done with like kind of like a double dare background. And you wonder if that's through the eyes of a child, how he's perceiving the situation you're in. It's kind of like maybe an underlying theme they're putting through the game, that did this actually happen? A meteorite struck the ground, you woke up from bed to go inspect it, and then your friend calls you back up because his brother's lost, and then did that all actually happen, or is that the imagination of a child? Is this adventure, are you actually, were you spoken to from a bee from the future telling you that potentially life could be extinguished on your planet if you don't join in this quest and find the songs? I mean, is that just imagination, or is that an actual adventure that's being happening to the kid? That's kind of the cool interpretation that the game leaves open to the player. And it also breaks the fourth wall because you interact with the characters occasionally throughout, and especially at the end.
hmm You know, I never even thought about that. That's like a really cool way to think about it. Is, you know, it's the innocence of a child. It's this game through the eyes of an innocent child, and like how they just hyperbolize everything and exaggerate it. Like that's, I mean, I can totally get that. I've never thought about that, but I 100% feel you on that. That's a really good observation
Yeah, it adds a lot of heart to it too.
for sure. Um, so I mean, speaking of, you know, Ness and the characters, that's one thing that's a little tough for me. Like the reason why like this game doesn't really sit like, you know, with, in my opinion, you know, with Chrono Trigger and being like
Mm-hmm.
kind of like this super emotional investment for me personally, is they make a point to kind of like not really give the characters in the party much personality. I mean, you
Yes.
have Ness, Paula, and Jeff, and then Pooh, which I mean, Pooh's
Yeah.
Pooh's hilarious, but the party, they don't ever really talk or form their own kind of personas very much, you
Yeah.
know? Like they're not communicating with each other ever, except for on one time when you rescue Paula from
Mm-hmm.
Forside, and Jeff kind of communicates with his dad a little bit, who is also a genius like Jeff, and they give him a little bit of identity. Jeff being the inventor and the whiz, and
Hmm.
Ness just kind of being the neighborhood kid. But I mean,
It's
they
one
don't.
dimensional.
It's very one dimensional, and they don't necessarily expand upon that at all, and that makes it a little tough for me to kind of get invested because I'm a very character driven person.
Absolutely.
Um, so I mean that'd be a little bit of a negative for me as I attach myself to those characters. But I want to like everything else, like every other character is a completely different story. Every other character in this game, other than the party, just exudes charm. So I mean, like you end up meeting this group of musicians called the Runway Five,
Yeah.
which are a straight up Blues Brothers comparison. Because I think this game took a point to, like you said, kind of like characterize American society, and one of those was the Blues Brothers, which is awesome. They're these wacky dudes who get themselves stuck in these scenarios, and like you have to bail them out, and then they help you out. Like there's a point where literally like when you save the Runway Five from their debt because they're stuck performing at this theater in Forside because they owe like millions of dollars, like literally
Hmm.
millions of dollars. You end up bailing them out, and like later on in the department store when you're fighting, actually it's not the department store. I think you're fighting them in the corporate building. Like they come and they beat the crap out of the boss. They just show up and they beat the boss up for you. So I mean that's awesome. Like I love that. And then everything from like we talked about earlier, the enemies just exude character.
Hmm.
And that to me, like that's the highlight of this game is it oozes just charm from just how like wacky and absurd everything is.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the TV show The Office because it's got goofiness, and then it's got heart, and then it's goofiness, and then it's heart again. And each time it shows a little bit of the actual the realness of the game to you. It reattaches you to the story. So I mean, and as far as pacing, I think this one has great pacing as well. To where it's kind of linear at first, and then it opens up to now you can go and you got to get these songs to defeat Gygus. So it's kind of cool how it opens up, in my opinion, and I feel like it keeps you on a pretty easy to follow path.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Cool. You have anything more to say about the presentation before I move on to gameplay?
No, I thought for what it is and for what I think they're trying to achieve, I feel like they nailed it in every sense.
Right on. Cool then. Well, let's move on to gameplay. So, as with the game before and every game today, this is a JRPG.
Yeah.
So it does have typical JRPG tropes: turn-based combat, leveling up, equipping items. Um, I mean, nothing
Yeah.
really about the combat sticks out to me. It's generic turn-based combat. It does like the Dragon Warrior kind of like first-person view of you just see the enemy on screen, and then you have
Hmm.
your health bar and mana bar, and then you navigate the menus, which are kind of clunky to be honest with you. I don't really like
Yeah.
navigating the menu. So um, there are a few things that this game does characterize as its own. So like magic in this game is PSI or Psi
Hmm.
as I call it. I don't know. I
Yep.
just say Psi because for some reason it makes me think psychic ability. Like that's how I rationalize that in my head. So
Hmm.
there's no real explanation of Psi, but I mean Psi is the magic system of the game, and I think Ness learns some Psi. One of the tidbits about the beginning of the game is you at the start of the game when you're naming your characters, you also get to pick your favorite food,
Hmm.
which become like the all supreme healing item. You get to pick your favorite thing, and when you pick your favorite thing, that's like your ultimate Psi move.
Hmm.
So for me, like I pick guitar, and so whenever Ness is using his biggest Psi attack, he's using the guitar against the enemies. So
It's very cool.
that's kind of cool. Um, Something they did that I did think was really clever, but I don't think was executed the best way is the rolling health bar.
Yeah.
So, when you get hit by an enemy, your health just starts rolling kind of like a slot machine. It just rolls down. And the thought there was like if you defeat the enemy or heal them before their health drops all the way, like it kind of diminishes the effect of that big hit.
Hmm.
But what, in my opinion, kind of happens more often than not is like all the enemies hit super hard
Hmm.
and the menus are too hard to navigate
Yeah.
to actually like heal your person in time. So I kind of think it's interesting that they implemented it, but it was just kind of like not the easiest to deal with. Um, so man, I have to say I just hate the menu of
Yeah.
Earthbound. Like that's like my one of my biggest pet peeves of this game is the menu system is just so difficult. Like when you go to a shop to buy something, like you can't buy a stack of items. Like
Yeah.
you can't just buy like 10 of something. I want 10 healing items. Like, no, you have to go and you have to talk to the guy and buy it. And then he's going to ask you, like, would you like something else? And you have to say yes. And then you have to buy it again. And then on top of all that, and this may be, some people may like this, there's the inventory management aspect of like, you can only carry like so many items on each character.
Hmm.
So to deal with that, they give you the delivery guy. Like you can call up the delivery guy and be like, "Hey, take my crap away." But he can
Yeah.
only carry 3 items at once, so you have to get like 3 things, and it whizzes off. And like that kind of clunky menu system, goes into the battle and goes into item management. And it just becomes like a chore. I think like the menu navigation is a chore in this game. So
Yeah, I would second that because even like when you have to go in there to check things, whereas in other games, that's one of the main buttons on your screen that you don't have to go into a menu for. So
mhm.
I agree with that. It's got like one extra step on everything. Yeah, maybe back in the day it didn't bother me so much, but you're right, it has not aged well compared
Mhm.
to like Chrono Trigger or like Final Fantasy 6.
And that may be part of me. Like I don't have the nostalgia factor for this game, so like
Mm-hmm.
I'm less forgiving of kind of those shortcomings.
Mm-hmm.
And like I mean, this doesn't ruin the game for me by no means. Like I still think this is a fantastic game. Like I collect uh, Nintendo games as a hobby, and I recently found a Super Nintendo cart of Earthbound in the wild, and I shelled out a stupid amount of money to buy that game, because that's a must-have for the collection, and I think it's a classic for a reason. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, I don't think it ruins the game by any means, but it's just something that irks me for sure. Um, so other things that are kind of cool about the game, kind of go back to like the mundane. We said it earlier. You need to heal. You go to the hospital. You need to like heal, like, or sorry, you need to like use a consumable. It's actual food, like it's cheeseburgers and lemonade and like just regular food. And I think it's just clever and kind of fun that it's a little mundane. You're not going to the Poke Center and you're not just using a potion. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's pretty cool. And all the weapons are like a baseball bat and a yo-yo.
Yeah, I think if you take the game for what it is, it's a satire on Western society with a deep embedded hero story in it. It is a fun game. I don't find it extraordinarily challenging. I think it's made to enjoy the ride and to
Hmm.
laugh a little bit about it on the way. Uh,
Totally. And laugh a lot you shall in this game. Like I definitely enjoy humor and comedy in this game. There's so many moments where you're just on the floor laughing because people are so cheeky. Like NPCs are like so cheeky.
hmm.
Like some of them are just straight up rude to you too. It's just
Oh
like wow.
yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of any direct quotes at the moment, but yeah, this game has me laughing a lot throughout the playthrough. So for sure, that's a bonus. Um, Goals, like how does this game present itself as far as its quest? I like the beginning because it kind of sets itself, as a kind of like a silly, absurd tale. You wake up with a big loud crash as this meteor hits the ground, and this bumblebee tells you like, "Hey, like there's this all powerful being called Gygus, and he's going to like take over the world, and we're gonna need you to go help out." And from there on out, there's almost zero direction from this
Yeah.
game. Like this game is just like, well, that's your goal. Like figure it out. So, you're in your hometown and you just got to figure out where to go next. So you go talk to the NPCs and try to kind of figure out what's going on and just go forward. So kind of like the minimal way of going about things. There isn't really this like grand quest they set you on. They just throw you in the deep right away. Like, yep, go save the world from the alien invasion. Like, bye.
They put weirdly a lot of stuff in that instruction manual, but then nobody ever had the instruction manual, so it was weird. A lot of things were just lost about it.
And wasn't the manual like the insert of this game was like a big part of it, right? I think something cool came with the actual physical copy of this game. I can't remember what it is, but I know that's why like the complete in-box version of Earthbound goes for like $800 now on
Oh,
eBay
jeez.
because like the insert's super unique and cool.
Yeah, well, they must have spent a lot of money. It was fully colored. It was very, very thick. It broke down everything. It told you secrets in the game. It had a whole bunch of stuff in it.
And I think that's a lot of old school games from Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, is they expected you to read the manual
Hmm.
before you played the game.
Oh yeah.
Um, so I mean, this could be one of those games where I never had the manual obviously, so I just kind of jumped into it and was a little confused myself. But that's very true. That's something I didn't think about before going into this game. Was yeah, there's a lot of old games that they just you kind of needed the manual.
It's weird. You could tell that that trend disappeared.
Hmm. Cool. Anything to say about the gameplay before we move on to music?
Like you said, the gameplay, I guess you could rate a little bit flatter, not as flashy or as exciting as some other JRPGs, but just fundamentally sound, a little bit more in depth than like the menus in Pokemon, but not much. It's really more about experiencing the story, in my
Hmm.
opinion, for Earthbound.
Hmm. Totally. Cool. So let's move on to music then. This game was composed by Keiichi Suzuki and Hirokazu Tanaka, which I don't know much about. I mean, they're not your typical Nintendo heroes. This isn't Koji Kondo, and this isn't a
Hmm.
Square game, so you're not getting Nobuo Uematsu. So yeah, I don't think they have too much of an impact like those guys would. But I mean, they did a great job. The kind of music in this game, like the rest of this game, is kind of goofy and wacky.
Hmm.
I think the main overall tone is it's very jazzy. Like it kind
Hmm.
of has like a jazzy motif going around the whole time. And another kind of cool thing about the music is it was very inspired by real world artists. Like they claim the Beach Boys was actually a huge musical influence on the soundtrack of this
All
game.
right, I could see that.
So I mean that's cool. Like there's nothing. I don't think this game has like the grand emotional soundscapes quite like
Mm-mm.
Final Fantasy VI or Chrono Trigger has. But I think that they definitely convey the awkward weirdness of the game with the music. One example I always think of is when you go to Moonside, which is the alternate forest side that's all lit up with the kind of neon
Yeah,
lines,
it's.
and everyone tells you like yes is no, no is yes.
Hmm.
It's just a wacky backwards place. The music is literally like arrhythmic, atonal weirdness like the whole time. So I think they do a good job of kind of um, conveying the absurdity of everything. But other than that, I don't really have too much to say about the music of this game.
Yeah, I felt like it did emulate the music of America at the time. There is some pretty good use of synthesizers that sound, emulate the theremin sound to kind of give it a sci-fi spookiness
Hmm.
when you're around the cultist, or even the very beginning of the game with the meteorite. I mean, the combat music's pretty simplified. Yeah, I'd say it doesn't convey the emotion that some of the other titles will, that'll inspire you or make you weep from the beauty of the music. But I think for what they were trying to do, they pretty much nailed it to
Hmm.
kind of give you like a fun, kooky, quirky, I think was their goal. Kind of poke
Totally.
fun at Americana.
Yeah, and I don't think it was like to speak to that. I don't think it was their point to be like the emotional, moody kind of brooding
Yeah.
music like the other games. Like that, they weren't out to do that. Like they were
Mm-mm.
out to like characterize this genre, and I think they did hit the nail on the head for that. Like by no means is this bad music. Like
No.
the one net music in the opening city is so
Mm-hmm.
catchy and so good. Like it gets so stuck in my head. Like I love the music in the opening city. So yeah. Anything else to say about the music before we kind of move on?
No, no, I think we hit all the points. I think it does what it's supposed to do.
Cool. So one thing I meant to do with Chrono Trigger that I kind of forgot to touch on, but I wanted to make sure we kind of do some maybe negatives on the game as
All
we're kind of
right.
rating through it. Like I'm gonna chalk it up to there is no negatives for Chrono Trigger because it's
Eh.
such a perfect game. But we'll have to talk about those sometime in the future. But anyways, I think um, I kind of spoke to my negatives of this game during the review, kind of like the item clunkiness
Hmm.
really being the big one. I think there is something to be said about like kind of like the tension of the game. I think this game kind of lacks like a certain like there's no sense of urgency. Like it's just
Hmm.
kind of like it's there. Like there's no looming threat. Like you're never really reminded that like Gygus is there and he's going to take over the world. So there's like no
Yeah.
tension, no immediate threat. Um, so I mean that with the kind of the no character development and the item menus are kind of my only things that kind of dissuade me from this game being like up there with Chrono Trigger in my opinion. But still a great game. I just don't think this game's like the masterpiece that Chrono Trigger or even a game we're gonna review after Final Fantasy VI is.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could second that. I would put this in a separate genre of almost a parody of the JRPG genre, like an Americanized parody.
True. I think yeah, you're right. I think it is kind of unfair to even kind of compare it to those. I mean, we kind of have to, as it's like kind of like the point of what
Hmm.
we're talking here. But I totally agree. It's a bit unfair to even be comparing it to those games because it's so different.
Yeah, it's just it's in its own quirky way because you're right. If you're comparing, Lord of the Rings, an epic tale of people putting a ring into a volcano, to a like earlier The Office or something. They're both good, but they're completely different.
Yeah,
They're doing different goals.
I would say it's like comparing like Spaceballs to Star Wars,
Very good, very
like
good.
because you have like the masterpiece that is Star Wars, which is
Hmm.
like very meticulously thought out, and then Spaceballs, which is like a great movie because it's so funny and it just pokes
Hmm.
fun at that like whole thing. But like Spaceballs isn't, the blockbuster like hit that Star Wars
Yes.
is. So like, I guess that'd be ultimately what I'd say about it. Like
Oh, fantastic.
it's unfair to really put this game up there. I feel bad. I honestly do feel a little bad. I feel like I've kind of like beat this game against the ground a little bit during this review, but like I don't dislike this game. Like
No,
I
no.
do like it. I think like I was trying to kind of get some more negatives going into this episode, and I think sadly like Earthbound is my least favorite of the three. So
Understood.
it got rung through a little bit. Like I'm sorry, Earthbound. Like you're a great game, and if you guys haven't played this game, it's a must play. It's definitely a must play on the Super Nintendo, and I would recommend it. I mean, it's got a huge legacy. Like moving on to the ratings, unless do you have anything negative to say?
No,
Now that I've like now that I've just like raked this game over the coals.
no, no.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Earthbound. So moving on to the rating. I think this game's got a huge legacy. So Earthbound being not one of my favorite games had led to something you brought up earlier, Undertale.
Yes.
Undertale is like another 10 out of 10. Like this game just exudes everything good about the genre. Like we'll definitely have to do a segment on some modern games that have retro feel. I think that'll be a
Yes.
segment we do in the future, and Undertale will definitely be up there because Undertale has that like wacky weird absurdity, but then they sprinkle an emotion and it's like, why am I laughing? And now I'm just crying.
Yeah.
Like I absolutely adore that game. Like that's in one of my top games of all time. Like so good. So I think Earthbound really set the scene for games like Undertale to exist, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, I would second that.
Um so impact, I mean this game once again left a huge impact on people. It has that cult underground following. You have people still crying to Nintendo, like, please give us a port of Mother 1 and Mother 3. And like Mother 1 wasn't even good. Like,
Hmm.
it was the failed attempt at Earthbound, it was the prototype.
Yeah.
But people are begging Nintendo to port those over, like I never actually played Mother 1 or Mother 3. I know Mother 3 is a Game Boy Advance title. And I think they even brought the protagonist into Smash. I think Lucas is the Mother 3 protagonist.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
But I've never played Mother 3, but I know there's people that are like always like, when are we gonna get Mother Nintendo? Like when's the Mother games coming over? So there's a huge testament to its legacy there. And then to comparisons, like there was nothing like this. I can't think of a game that does what Earthbound does like at the time. I mean, now you have some homages, but nothing to really compare it to for its time.
Yeah, it kind of created a quirky genre. Um, but aside from that, yeah, I mean, it wasn't revolutionizing as far as gameplay. It was more so just showing how a story could be told from the eyes of a kid, I guess you could say, which was kind of a neat take on the genre.
Hmm. Right on. Cool. Well, unless you have anything else to say about Earthbound, we can move on to our next title.
I just thought it was a really good game. But yeah, I don't think it was breaking the walls down in a lot of stuff, but I did think it was a very solid title, which is why it's high on the list.
For sure. I mean, we're talking about this game now for a reason, because it is at the top of the Super Nintendo list.
Mm-hmm.
So this is going to bring us to our last and final game of the episode, and that is going to be Final Fantasy VI, or otherwise known as in America and on the actual, card itself, Final Fantasy III.
Yes.
So this is, in my opinion, the best Final Fantasy game. That's a bold statement, and I know a bunch of people are big fans of 7, a bunch of people are huge fans of 10, but this game to me just embodies everything good about the Final Fantasy series. I love this game. I absolutely love this game.
Well, so initially, I would say Final Fantasy VII would be my favorite because that was the first where I was the appropriate age when that game came out on PlayStation. I was old enough to play it when it came out and understand it as far as Final Fantasies went. So that one always holds a special point in my heart. But in preparation for this episode, I had not played Final Fantasy VI, so I picked it up a little over a week ago and have been playing it and have completed it. And I have to say, Final Fantasy VI might be the best Final Fantasy game that there were. It was vastly epic and impressive, not only in storytelling, not only in scale, but just music, character development, villainy. The final Kefka battle is just one of epic proportions.
Mm-hmm.
In the end, the story multiple times throughout, I thought I was at the end of the game, only to find out that I was only partially through the game, and that the tides had turned against me. And anytime you start making any footing in that game, it's all taken away from you, and you have to start over again. It teaches valuable lessons. It's got complex stories. It just really is everything. Everything a story, a TV show, anything that you watch on television, it has it all in this game. I was very, very impressed by Final Fantasy VI.
So let me get this right. You played this game to completion in a week.
Yes.
That's impressive, man. That's very impressive. You liked it so much that you played it in the course of an entire week.
Well, I got sucked into it to where when I was at work working on things and I had any downtime, I found myself reading about it. It was one of those. The same thing happened to me when I got into the Dark Souls series.
It just immersed you.
I just became obsessed with it. And I found a lot of parallels because I fell really deep into the Dark Souls series. And I found a lot of things that this game reminded me that Dark Souls may have borrowed. And it'd be just personal observations from having played this game now and having played those games multiple times. I really thought they did a really cool thing by creating a world that essentially to me reminded me of like a European steampunk.
Yeah, I think they coined it as like a second industrial revolution sort of world.
Yeah, which I thought was neat. It almost feels European to me in setting. It was just I thought it was an odd setting when I first played this game when I was younger. I was too young to play it, but you start off in the mechs, and I'm not spoiling anything, but you start off in the mechs, and you have been sent to fight an Esper, which by the king and Kefka send you out to go get this Esper. They're trying to become ultra powerful by harnessing magic, which has been extinct. And I thought it was a cool premise that there was no magic, kind of like Star Wars, where, you know, Han Solo is like, the Force, what are you talking about, the Force? That there was this old magic, and that they're on the brink right now during this time frame of magic being reintroduced back into the world. And that the levels of manipulation of characters throughout the tale to the end, I found to be just awesome. How they can paint such descriptive characters with each individual motives, much like you said about Chrono Trigger, just that each character has their motives for the story of what's happening in the world. And I like I said, Final Fantasy VI might be the best Final Fantasy out of all of them.
Yeah, I mean, I would wholeheartedly agree. Like, we'll definitely have to go into some of those points in detail when we do our review, but like, I 100% agree with everything you said. Like, I really like your Star Wars comparison, which is, you know, another kind of Star Wars comparison for the episode. But yeah, like, you know, there's the magic is gone, but there's kind of, you know, there's a new Jedi in the mix, you know?
Yeah.
So let's go into some history before I move on to the review. So this game was developed and published by Square, which, I mean, we all know the Final Fantasy series, huge, decade-spanning series full of classics and hits. You know, Square being the company that had created Final Fantasy and many other of their like really amazing RPGs on the system. Because I mean, I think we talked about the Dream Team for Chrono Trigger. I mean, that was Square as well. Final Fantasy games, the development began from 6 right after 5, and that was pretty typical of Final Fantasy. Like, they'd complete one game and then just start development on the next one. And the director of the previous games, which is the series creator, Hironobu Sakaguchi, he was too busy with other projects at the time. So one being, you know, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana. Like, he was doing some other like big hits, so he didn't really have the capacity to work on it. So he defaulted the direction to Yoshinori Kitase and Hiroyuki Ito. And once again, you'll have to forgive me on some of these name pronunciations. Like, I apologize if you actually know how they're pronounced. So Hiroyuki Ito, which was the lead battle designer for many of the past titles. He's credited with creating the ATB system. Longtime collaborator for the Final Fantasy series, Yoshitaka Amaro, returned as the character designer. He contributed very widely to like the visual concept and the design. They do, however, in interviews say that this was a very team-based project. Like, they all fed off each other. You know, even though Hironobu Sakaguchi, who didn't direct the game, you know, he helped with the production, you know, kind of giving them like the skeleton and letting, you know, the two others kind of roll with that idea and really flesh out the design and the writing. So it's cool that, you know, the reins were kind of let go from Hironobu, who had, you know, done so well with these original games. And, you know, as soon as he lets the reins go, like, these guys, they really proved themselves. I mean, I think they hit it out of the park. Like, they took the initiative and they made a great game when it was entrusted upon them, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, like I said, this is part of the extremely popular Final Fantasy series. It's the 6th installment, but was only the 3rd at the time to be released outside of Japan. So, you know, it was Final Fantasy 3 in America. That's what you got on the cart. And, you know, for some reason they didn't think the original ones would appeal to the Western audiences quite so much. It wasn't until, you know, I think this game, and I think even the prior game, Final Fantasy 2, was pretty well received in America, but I think they were kind of sleeper hits. You know, I don't think they were quite received as well in America until much later. So it was released for the Super Nintendo on April 2nd, 1994 in Japan, and October 11th, 1994 in North America. It actually didn't see a PAL release until March 1st of 2002 on the PlayStation port.
Jeez.
So that's interesting. They had to wait so long to get a legitimate port of that game. I mean, it's since been released on like many platforms. You can play this game on the Game Boy Advance. You can play it on mobile. There's even a Windows port of this game. So if you haven't played this game, there's so many ways to play it, and please do, because this is a masterpiece of JRPGs. And coming from someone who absolutely loves the genre, this is in fact like a masterpiece of the genre. I mean, it's up there with Chrono Trigger. Chrono Trigger, I have definitely the nostalgia for, so it's higher up in my heart. But I mean, this game is a masterpiece. I mean, shoot, I think we can go right into the review of this game. Um, so graphically, the sprite work is great. Like Chrono Trigger, they used the same sprites for the battle sprites and the overworld sprites.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot more detail there. Just you were able to appreciate kind of how big the sprites were, and they were very emotive. Like they did a really good job, kind of giving every single character and every single sprite their own like kind of like persona and visual look. They all look very different, and they all kind of embody their character. You have Shadow, who's the ninja, and
Yeah,
got
he's pretty
the
baller.
ninja garb and everything, and you got Locke, who's like the thief, and he wears the bandana. Um,
Yes.
Edgar, who's like the king, looks regal. His brother Sabin has the monk look. So I mean, all the sprites, they all did a great job, kind of really making them individual and unique. I really love the enemy sprites as well. I mean, especially the bosses. I mean, the bosses are so big. Like the
Yes.
boss sprites, like they tower above your character sprite, and they take up half the screen when you're playing, and there's just so much detail, and they look evil. A lot of the bosses just look crazy and evil, and
Yeah.
they kind of command like a fear.
Yes.
Um, One thing I really liked about this game that was new to Final Fantasy VI was the use of Mode 7 graphics while exploring the world map. So it switched to that kind of Mode 7 graphics where the whole world map was kind of that, the one big sprite that rotated around. And it gave the world kind of a three-dimensional feel to it, unlike the previous Final Fantasies where it's very top-down and very two-dimensional. Like this game, although it's still technically a 2D system, like those Mode 7 graphics really shine during the world exploration, and especially when you're flying around the airship and when you're on a chocobo, because
Yes.
they give you that kind of third person perspective and zooming around the map. I mean, it's so fun and it feels fast. It
It's
feels fast
very
and
quick.
exciting. So I mean, the fact that they could give it that kind of dynamic feel with those Mode 7 graphics, I think was really, really cool.
They also had a couple points in the game where it would cut in with a first-person perspective. When you were going down the rafter or in the raft through the water, it would cut to a first person for a second. It would show the random encounters. You could tell they were definitely trying to use the full graphic potential of the SNES.
Definitely. Um, Moving on to atmosphere, I think this game definitely has like a dark, moody tone to it,
Yes.
and I'm super about that. I mean, not to kind of show myself as like an edgelord or anything, but I really like the dark, moody. I'm a self-proclaimed emo kid, and like that dark, brooding atmosphere really speaks to me. I really like the kind of Industrial Revolution background, which I mean that's kind of saying a lot for me. I mean, I'm a huge fantasy dork. I think I've spoke to that in the past episode, and I really like when games kind of have that more like fantasy sword and magic setting. But this game, it has the more industrial steampunk setting, and I still like am so into the environment.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Like it's not it's something I'm super familiar with, but it's still like hit home for me, which I think was really cool.
Yeah, I thought the whole game had almost like a French vibe to it. Kind of like
Interesting.
like a French steampunk vibe to it. I don't know why. Maybe it was Kefka being almost like a jester. I'm not sure because I thought he made such a great villain in this game
I
because
agree.
you kind of detect him coming unhinged slightly
Hmm.
throughout the entire course of it. But yeah, for some reason, the setting to me, like you said, is very dark in tone. In fact, Kefka showing his insanity when he poisons everyone. I thought that was pretty heavy for a game like that to poison an entire village. They
Totally. I
also
mean,
show a wife and a kid die. I thought that was really, really dark tone. I wasn't expecting that when that came up in the game. I thought that was
Definitely.
very dark, but I liked it because it felt Game of Thronesy kind of,
Hmm.
which I thought
The
was
stakes
cool.
are high right off the bat, you know.
There's multiple parts and main players die. I thought that was pretty heavy too in the game.
Yeah.
Um, I thought there was a lot of, and there's a part where one of the females, Celis or
Saris?
yeah,
Celis, Saris? I know.
Celis.
Yeah.
She, I mean, I don't know if it's a spoiler or not, but I mean, there's a part where she tries to kill herself, which
Hmm.
I thought was also a really heavy tone to take in this game.
Definitely.
And that was, I mean, geez, this was a long adventure too. The game I felt was very long and so much stuff happens, and it's broken up pretty well in between with some lighthearted moments, like when you sing at the opera.
Oh, I love the opera scene. Like this game just pours emotion into many of those scenes like that. You talked about Celis, like she leaps from the palisades
Yes,
into the
yes.
water, and like they kind of like slow mo her down, and she's like drips with emotion. And the entire opera scene, man, like I think that was definitely a high point in this game. Is they have the music and like the characters, that kind of meta, the game characters portraying the opera characters. And
Hmm.
I mean, like, oh, it's beautiful, man. Like, I love it.
Yeah, and then it's all a ruse to steal an airship. I mean, the whole thing feels like to me like a heist film where they're constantly getting foiled and then having to reinvent their plan. And then what I actually thought was the end of the game was only the halfway point of the game
Oh,
when
I know.
essentially, I mean, again, spoiler, not trying to spoil anything, but like Kefka gets the upper hand and kind of F's up everything.
Uh-huh.
And it does a lapse of time where you have to rebuild
It
before
goes a
you can
whole year
continue.
later.
That's crazy to me. I couldn't believe they did that. Yeah, like I thought that was such a neat twist, and that's almost like your act break, where you have where I thought that was the end of the game. That was literally the only halfway point.
Hmm.
So I thought that was it was really cool. I thought the pacing in that game, despite the fact that I thought it was a big climactical end, was actually just a part of the game. I
Uh-huh.
thought the pacing never ever let me down. I felt like the ride was very high, and then it would have its lows. The builds and the crescendos were so well paced. I said it had the feel of a television series where it keeps you cliffhanging throughout the whole thing.
I mean, I just love that you played this game for the first time and then decided you had to play it to completion and beat it in 1 week. I mean, that's a testament right there to
Well,
this game.
I kind of got really hooked on it. Like I said, I found myself reading about the characters and the story
Oh,
and the
that makes me so
setting.
happy.
Well, it's cool to think about. Kafka might be the best villain ever.
Dude, I 100% agree. Like to talk about Kefka a little bit more, maybe move on to some characters, but Kefka, like you said, his like subtle and kind of like just I don't even want to call it subtle necessarily because they do it with a good pace, but his like drift into insanity, you know what I mean? And he's such a
Yes.
cool villain because he's a clown. Like you're
Yeah.
introduced to this character and he's literally a clown. He's just another human. Like he's not like a god. Like in most Final Fantasy games, like you're up against God. Like that's the boss. Like
Hmm.
Kefka is just a normal like human, and I don't want to spoil his kind of past and history there, but I
Yes.
mean like he just gets crazier and crazier to the point to where, like you said, the halfway point in the game, he gets the upper hand and he does some like really heinous stuff. Like you don't empathize with him at all. Like he's just like a crazy evil dude, and like you hate him. You hate the guy because he's so awful. So like 100%, like I think Kefka might be one of the greatest video game villains of all time.
I would second that. I thought he was so good because he betrays, well, I mean, whatever. I don't want to
I don't
say.
have to talk too much. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, I just feel like he just did everything I thought he was going to do, he did well.
Uh-huh.
It was just he was a really well done character. I thought Tara was a fantastic character too. She's
Hmm.
more or less the key to everything.
Totally.
And I liked how they introduced the characters when they first come on the screen. It goes to black and it tells the description.
Yeah,
I
a
thought
little
all that was
backstory.
very stylish.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
just
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just a really well done game, very polished.
Yeah, I really liked all the way they introduced the characters, and I think style definitely. I mean, the game opens up with so much style, like the opening sequence of the game, with Terra and the two soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
in the Magitech armor, just kind of like
Mm-hmm.
standing over Narsh, the opening city, and like that whole opening sequence is so cool, like the color palette that they chose, and like finding that first esper, like it's
Mm-hmm.
so cool, like it instantly gets you hooked, like such a moody atmospheric intro. And then to go back to the characters, like this game actually has the largest and most varied cast in the entire series.
All
So there are
right.
14 permanent playable characters in this game, which is crazy
Gotcha.
for a Final Fantasy to have like that many characters. And they all have motivations and they're all fleshed out. Like you said, as soon as your party member is going to be introduced because they black the screen and they give you kind of some backstory on the character, and
Mm-hmm.
throughout the game you kind of get more and more of the motivation of each of the characters, and you get a chance to kind of act out some of their goals and their motivations, and they're all really cool. Like I really enjoy the entire cast, well, most the entire cast, and I'll get into some of that later. But yeah, the cast is really cool. I mean, I really gravitated towards Locke because I'm a big fan of the thief
Yes.
rogue kind of archetype, and he's also kind of got that lover boy like
Yes.
vibe to him. His kind of pain and darkness is he failed to save someone he loved back during one. He was a treasure hunter, and during one of his treasure hunts, like someone
Mm-hmm.
he loved had gotten hurt, and he never forgave himself for it. And
And
I
that's
just I love that.
well, I think you can like you for Chrono Trigger, you can pursue those storylines too.
Yeah, definitely. You can go and you can experience, like if you have the right character at the right time, you get to experience a bit more of what they have to say about the situation, and I like that. So it kind of helps to like bring whatever party member you feel like has more of an attachment to the situation. And I don't think they ever at the beginning early on in the game they force you to use a certain group of characters. You have Sabin's like
Mm-hmm.
scenario, where he goes off in his own thing after getting lost, and you have like Locke and Celis's scenario, and they kind of make you have to use a certain party like early on in the game, and then they opened it up to where you can kind of pick like any of the cast members for your four-person party.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of like how they did the beginning though, because they set the tone for the characters really well. Kind of forcing you into their situations. Um, One thing that the creators said was a goal for this game was they wanted to have all the characters seem like the main character,
All right.
and I think they really nailed that. I mean, I love the cast, and no one necessarily stands out as like the shining star. I mean, Tara kind of did at the beginning. Like I thought she was going to be
Mm-hmm.
like kind of the main protagonist, and although she is kind of like a missing link of sorts, and not to spoil the story too much, like she does have a big weight in the story. Like she's by no means like the main focus. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. I did think that was cool too, because every character, even sideline characters that aren't, the main playable ones, they play a great part in the story as well. I mean, every character plays a great part in the story.
The
Uh,
NPCs are really cool. I mean, you come off to some NPCs like there's, the continent's kind of ravaged by this war that the Empire is waging. They're trying to get all the Espers so that they can become all powerful, and you get to see kind of the war torn nature of the continent as the Empire is sweeping across it. And there's a part where a soldier who's injured is bedridden, and you have to help him deliver letters to his lost love, who they got separated from, and you kind of help him deliver letters to her. And then, I mean, I don't want to spoil it too much. There's some pretty emotionally heavy impact with that later on too. Um, so I mean, even the NPCs, kind of draw into the weight of the story, and make it seem super grand. The Emperor and Kefka as villains, and everything just was presented so well, I feel like, in the character front. And I think that's why this game stands so high on the list for me, being the character driven guy I am. I think they just nailed the characters. Like there's so much character development. I love what they did with Shadow. Shadow is
yeah,
kind of a jerk and didn't want to help out, but uh, their character arc is really satisfying throughout that game. So yeah, I feel like they did a really good job making you invested in every single party member and letting you flesh out the details of every single one of them. No one falls to like, be kind of like second tier. They're all very powerful in their own right.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that.
Cool. You have anything more to say about presentation before we move on?
I recommend the game for everyone. I think the game, in a similar sense to Chrono Trigger, similar sense to Earthbound, starts off as something small that continually spider webs into a greater story. And Final Fantasy VI's story does not disappoint, because the whole entire time you are just at the heels of the villain, and it almost feels like the villain is winning the entire game.
Definitely.
And I feel like that's such a, like you said, the tension in Earthbound wasn't there necessarily because it's kind of at your own pace. It's kind of goofy and lighthearted. Whereas in this game, the tension is nonstop there. There's points where without, without being able to save often, the game would be just so frustratingly difficult. There's parts where it's hard. I mean, I died multiple times on certain bosses. They're just, until you crack the code, they're so hard.
The dragon specifically, I remember the dragon fights just
all dragon
beating
fights
me up,
sucked.
man. Yeah, I will
And you
also
had to get a bunch of them.
I'm gonna raise my glass to save states, and I'll go out and say it. When I play through these games today, I'm playing them with save states because I don't know, I'm an adult and I can do what I want. it makes the games easier to enjoy for me. So
Oh yeah, I definitely recommend it with the save states.
yeah, any JRPG is good with save states because life happens and you can't be like, hold on, I have to get to the next save point, because sometimes that save point is a long ways away.
Absolutely, and this game is pretty relentless. There's nothing more hype, kind of similar to a Dark Souls game when you beat the boss. But when you hear that, and then they're like, and they turn red, like when you hear that pop, you're just like, yes, take that. Like there's times where you're at the edge of your seat, just barely surviving.
Yeah,
so
definitely.
I thought the fights were very exhilarating.
Definitely. So I mean, that kind of that puts us into the gameplay. Good segue there into the gameplay. I think some of the bosses are definitely like heady and scary and kind of difficult, but I don't feel like this is like a difficult game. I don't feel like this is a game that was hard to play at all. I feel like it's paced out really well, and just like I said with Chrono Trigger, this isn't a game where you need to grind in it all. I never felt like I had to, and I love that about this game, because grinding it grinds my gears to have to go grind through an RPG. Like, I don't want the pace of my game to be halted so I can gain a couple levels in order to beat the boss. Like, even though the bosses were difficult and posed like a welcome and good challenge, like I never felt like they were unfair and I needed to go like grind in order to beat them. So to backpedal a bit, genre, once again, JRPG. Got the typical Final Fantasy ATB combat system. In this game, and I think we neglected to talk about this with Chrono Trigger too, with the ATB system, you can choose whether you want to wait or it to be active. And I like that about the ATB system, is you can have it to where the enemy waits for you to pick your move, or it's just going at you when it's his turn, because the enemy has an ATB meter just like you have an ATB meter. So when it's the enemy's turn, he's gonna whack you. But there's a ton. Like, I have a ton to say about the combat of this game. It was so much fun. Like the micromanagement aspect of like the character customization, the combat is so much fun. Like, I'm the type of person where if you give me the ability to customize my characters like in a very deep manner, I'm going to take it and I'm going to enjoy it. And that might be a negative for some people, but this game is pretty heavy on the micromanagement. So to start off with the combat's super duper fun because every character has their own ability, and it's almost like a class system, kind of. They don't really come out and say it, and it doesn't have like the job system of other Final Fantasies where they're swappable. But every character kind of has a role and an ability. Locke, being the thief, has a steal ability. Sabin, who's kind of the monk, he's really fun because he has kind of these like Street Fighter, like Hadoken style button combos that you press in order to execute his abilities, and his abilities range from, like suplexing a
Mm-hmm.
single enemy to like doing a whole like AoE party attack. Um, and they're just super fun to pull off and sometimes difficult, they're because I mean the button combinations can be anything from like pushing the control stick all the way up and around, and, YX up down AB, like doing the Konami code to freaking
Mm-hmm.
execute a command, and that's super fun. And kind of a quick tidbit on Sabin that I really like about this game is his suplex ability. Literally, he takes the enemy and he lifts it up into the air and he like smashes it into the ground behind him like a straight up like WWE suplex, and it misses a lot of the enemies. It's not really like a reliable attack. But there's one boss in the game that you
I
can
think I know.
suplex, and there's a boss in the game that is a literal ghost train. So there's a point in the game where you find yourself in a haunted forest and then onto a haunted train that's haunted by ghosts and other enemies. And when you get to the front of the train, you start running down the tracks. Your whole party's running down the tracks while this ghost train is like literally chasing you. And you can suplex the ghost train.
I thought that was hilarious, by the
Yeah.
way.
So you can suplex the ghost train, and then promptly after you suplex the ghost train, you just do a Phoenix down so you can murder it in one hit. But anyways, I thought that was like super cool. It's a little kind of one-off thing there. But anyways, yeah, every party member has their thing, and it's super fun because it makes it more unique and active. It's not just like, okay, this guy's gonna attack, this guy's gonna use magic, and this guy's gonna heal. Like, like sure there's a bit of that, but everyone's ability is super fun, and it kind of adds depth to the combat. Um, and to talk about magic, this game does have a magic system, but it's like we talked about earlier. Magic is kind of void in the world. There was only one magic user thought to be left, and that was Terra. Kind of maybe a little minor
Hmm.
spoil there, but not really too much because that's discovered right away. But she's able to use magic, and she's the only one until you come across your first espers,
Hmm.
and that's how the magic system works here. So you have these things called espers, which I don't really get into the past or the reason of those too much because that's kind of big story material. But once you have an esper, you can equip that esper, and that esper acts as like the summoning system. So you can execute the esper, and it consumes a lot of your mana, and it'll do like a big attack or like a huge support heal or something like
Hmm.
that.
Hmm.
But what the esper also does is it teaches you magic, which is really cool. So every esper has a certain set of spells that it teaches. And when you equip an Esper and you start leveling up, every encounter gives you like a point, like a magic point. And the more magic points you get, the further along it progresses you to unlocking the spell.
Hmm.
And some more powerful spells you learn at kind of a slower rate, and some of the more beginner spells you actually learn at a quicker rate. So you have to have them equipped for quite a few battles, and then eventually it'll teach you all the spells. And then the cool thing about that is once your character has learned the spell, you can unequip the Esper, and that character knows that spell permanently now.
Which is cool.
So yeah, every character can learn every spell. So every character can use magic with the use of Espers, and I really liked that as kind of like a customization point. Um, I mean, sure, some of the characters are much better at magic. I think Terra's innate magic skill is much higher than Locke's per se.
Yes.
So you got to be smart with that. So I mean, espers aren't just for the summon magic and the magic spells. Like when you have an esper equipped, some of them give you an added bonus attribute when you level up. So you'll level up and you'll get a +2 to your HP or a +2 to your strength with each level up when you have a specific esper equipped. So I really liked the customization levied by the esper system. I thought that was super unique and fun. And if that wasn't enough management, like this is why I talked about the micromanagement of the characters here. They also introduced the relic system into
Yeah.
Final Fantasy VI, and basically every character has 2 relic slots, and the relics are kind of just like perk items They give you extra abilities, or they auto cast certain spells. Like one of them gives your character sprint, one of them gives you like extra fight damage, one of them gives you bonus defense. My favorite relic lets you equip two weapons instead of a weapon and a shield, and then you can
Hmm.
attack twice.
Yeah.
So being able to kind of customize your character with the use of relics and kind of like micromanaging your team with which Esper and which relic and kind of what role you want them to fill is a ton of fun. Like you can create so many combinations with all 14 members and 4 people per party. Like you can create so many cool combinations for each character. And I think for some people that's a little overwhelming. But once you get the hang of it, it's pretty simple and easy to understand. Um, it's just really cool. Like I'm a big fan of that micromanagement system and think that made the combat really unique and really fun.
Well, so I also enjoyed the system, but I don't know if I get as in depth as you do with it, because I had to have a guide in tow in order to spend my currency correctly, because I was afraid of how to level up my character. I don't know. I felt like a lot of it took me a minute to understand how it worked. I didn't even start really investing too much into it till nearing halfway through the game is when I started understanding it from doing it. But I did love the customization and the different, like you said, even perks. I liked how each character had their own unique moves. I thought all of that was really, really well done. Um, I thought the combat across the board, the boss fights across the board were very cool. And much like how you go slam the train, there's the octopus that pursues you. I thought that was like a funny little quirky thing to put in there, and you keep
Mm-hmm.
beating him and he talks trash the whole time you're fighting him. Like all that's like goofy mixed in with a very serious setting. So, and just a movie that has it all, a game that has it all type thing. It's got the humor, it's got the suspense, it's got the action, it's got the drama, it's got the feels, it's got it all.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the combat I did find pretty, like, once you start getting used to it, I found it pretty simple. But like you said, it's not the most challenging game. But I still get a little confused by some of the settings, and mainly what I found worked for me was haste to get the first hit in. I thought was always like a good tactic,
Mm-hmm.
and casting Phantom, because it negates physical attacks.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the creatures fight physical, and then you can use magic or whatever combination you want in retaliation. But I found those to be the two most like useful spells.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
For
and
sure.
I kind of like cheesed my way through some fights and stuff.
But I love that you can do that though. I mean, I think
Yeah, yeah,
it's a pretty big thing in Final Fantasy games. Like once you break the system, like you can totally cheese your way through it. But I'm a fan of like, like studying the system and then breaking it. Like there's just
yeah.
something really fun about that.
Yeah, but at no point did I find, like you said, that I had to get to a point where I grind to beat a boss. I felt like the way that the story progressed, again, I feel like this one was designed to win,
Hmm.
to where they make it fun and the progression not backbreaking by
For
any
sure.
means.
Cool, man. So more to kind of talk about the general gameplay. This game is split kind of into two different parts, as you mentioned earlier. It's not really spoilery to talk about, but there is the world of balance and then the world of ruin
Hmm.
are the two kind of halves of this game. And the first half of the game is kind of a linear experience. Like, the story's laid out in front of you, the goals laid out in front of you. I mean, you gotta, go stop the Empire from gathering all
Hmm.
the Espers and taking over the world. Like, pretty straightforward goal. The way they kind of fill in the details is what makes that rich. Um, but once you get to that kind of twist and like where you said you thought the game ended, there's a whole other half of the game, and that's the world of ruin, and that's a much more side quest and exploration heavy kind of side of the game. So it's cool that they give you both. They rail you a little bit, but then they let you kind of just like, okay, go do whatever, like go find everyone and do everything you need to do. So I really like that. Yeah, I love everything about this game. Like this is as far as the kind of the quintessential Final Fantasy. Like this game rules. Like I love it. I'm gonna gush about it some more as I've gushed about Chrono Trigger before, and most of the games at the top of these lists, which why we decided to do this podcast in the first place. Is
Oh yeah.
I just love talking about these games. They bring me so much joy.
I found the back half much harder than the first half.
Definitely.
Because it's almost like a boss run.
Mm-hmm.
Especially the very last stretch is boss after boss after boss after boss. I thought that was kind of cool. And then you get to Kefka and you think he's going to be easier, and he's just as hard.
Yeah.
As like the 3 bosses you had to fight before him.
I think that's like a Final Fantasy thing. Is there's always like, this is even my final form, like.
Yeah.
And they don't even give you like a save point or a heal before any of it. You're just like, yeah, well, good luck.
Yeah.
Like I can't tell you how many times as a kid I was stuck at like Sephiroth in the final form.
Oh yeah.
Just like so angry because like the final form of Sephiroth is so mean, and I actually do feel like Final Fantasy VII is a game you have to grind in, which is one of the reasons I will put Final Fantasy VI above 7, even though 7 has like the 3D graphics and everything. Like I personally am more of a fan of the 2D graphics. There's more charm, to them, and I think, I just think this game is a better game than 7. So all you 7 fans can write angry letter, retro.radio.rumble@gmail.com. Just go ahead or tweet us at rumble_retro about how angry you are that Final Fantasy VI is better than 7 in our opinions. And we're very happy to hear your opinion on that. In fact, I would welcome it. Nothing would make me happier than for you to tweet us out or send us an email on how you thought about anything we're saying about these games. Like,
oh yeah,
we love talking about them and discussing them. So tweet us out, send us an email. Final Fantasy VI is better than 7. Deal with it. So you cool to go start talking about music?
Yeah.
So the music is a masterpiece. Like I don't know how many times I've said that, but I like the music in this game even more than Chrono Trigger, which Chrono Trigger I like as a whole even more because of probably like the nostalgia and just everything surrounding that game. But I think that this is sheer genius in video game music. I know like Nobuo Uematsu, who's the composer, like everyone knows him. He's the tried and true classic Square composer. Who's known for some great works, and this soundtrack is widely considered his masterpiece. From many people, not just me saying that, but I mean when you have a great composer, and you talk about the great composer's greatest work, like that's a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I would say Nobuo Uematsu, like his use of like motif and everything with that kind of thematic track that it opens up with, and whenever there's an emotional moment, he kind of throws that motif back in there to kind of remind you of that theme. I mean, that's right up there with some of like the big Baroque, and Renaissance composers of yore. Like I think he's just as skilled of a composer as like the guys, Mozart and Beethoven, Debussy and the guys you're reading about in history books. I think this man is a genius for this music. Just so talented. Like every time that theme plays, like I'm just like moved. It doesn't matter how many times I hear it, like I'm moved. Like the depiction of the scene in the video game and how the music really drills that in is just perfect. I mean, it's so somber and so sad, and I love it.
Yeah. I found all the music to be great. It felt like every character had its own motif. Every town had its own motif. The first half of the game and the second half of the game have its own motif. I just felt that, like you said, you could hold him in the same regards of a Beethoven, a Mozart. In fact, I believe he would work on it on a synthesizer and then transpose it into the video game MIDI. But I mean, every song in it reminds me of a movie. It reminds me of a movie scores transposed to 16-bit music. But yeah, across the board, all the music, none of it got annoying, repetitive, any of the such. I thought the music across the board is a 10 out of 10 in this game.
Definitely 10 out of 10. We haven't talked about sound design too much because I kind of feel like there isn't much sound design to be had in RPGs because music's playing
Yeah.
most of the time. But one thing I wanted to point out, as far as sound design, is I will never forget Kefka's laugh.
Oh yeah, it's like famous.
Yeah, Kefka's laugh is so like it's just it's unforgettable. It's just it's ingrained. It's evil. It's heinous, and the way they pulled it off with the 16-bit samples is so intense. You know.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's awesome. Like I said, he is just such a good character. Um, from his sprite for the inside the game, and then compared to him when you're fighting him, his sprite is so flamboyant and extravagant and silly but evil. It's all conveyed in just one boss fight. The sprite they used for his boss fight.
Hmm.
I can't get over because Sephiroth was probably my favorite villain in the Final Fantasy genre until I played this game, where I think Kefka easily overshadows them.
Hmm.
Because I mean, he's incredibly competent throughout the whole game, and you could argue that he completed what he seeked out to do in the game.
Yeah, for
To
sure.
be incredibly vague
Uh-huh.
about the game's events, but he does it. He is a mastermind, and he becomes a force to be reckoned with, and
Hmm.
you have to respect him. And like you said, his laugh, right when you hear it, I mean, multiple times throughout the game, because he's a reoccurring villain. It really is very impactful.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's great. The sound design, like you said, is not to be is not too prevalent in these games. It's more about the music, and you have your standard sounds and such. But there's a couple key ones that do stick out.
Yeah,
And
and even like I mean, it's a Final Fantasy game, so it has like the intense battle music, the intense boss music.
yes,
You know, every time you get into a battle, you get the heated, drivey sort of sound that you
mm-hmm.
get from Final Fantasy, and the boss music is always even more intense. Like the random encounter happens, but as soon as you pop into a boss fight and the music's different, you're like, oh, okay, like I know what's going on. And of course, like it has the typical Final Fantasy victory theme. Like you can't have a game with that.
Yes,
It's like that's you know
it's, and they
everyone
still
loves it.
use it.
Yep, yep. Was that in 15? I actually did not play Final Fantasy 15.
15. So Final Fantasy 13 was the last one I played. I didn't play the 13 too.
Hmm.
They did another one in between, but yeah, 15. My friend's playing it. He says he loves it, but I
Hmm.
haven't played it.
Yeah, so I also have not played that game. It's not a
13 was awesome.
I liked the paradigm shift thing in 13, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't play those. 15, it's not a retro game. Why would I waste my time with it,
I hear you. I hear you. Well,
Just kidding, just kidding.
I've noticed that Capcom's like kind of remaking some of their older games in the newer, engines. It would be, and I mean, who knows? I could be one of the only people thinking this, but I was so impressed with 6. That game could easily be remade with modern graphics
And
for
maybe
a whole new audience.
and maybe, since 7 is getting the treatment,
Mm-hmm.
the remake treatment, which looks fantastic, by the way. I'm excited to play it.
Me too.
But since 7 is getting that remake treatment, like maybe if it's received well, we'll get stuff like 6. I kind of doubt it. I kind of think like 7 is the poster child for Final
Yes.
Fantasy, so it definitely gets that treatment. But I mean, I would love to see something like a remake for 6. But on the flip side, and I have thought this about people who want like a modern Chrono Trigger, like
Mm-hmm.
maybe we don't actually want that because it kind of takes away from the charm of those 2D sprites and everything. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think story wise, it would still really stick out, but I myself really do like seeing the 2D sprites and the way they convey the world and the emotion with less the kind of less is more, and the less
Yeah.
resources is really cool to me, which is why we're doing this retro video game podcast, is I really like that about it. But needless to say, I mean, I still play modern games as well. I don't just play retro games, and anything more Final Fantasy 6 would make me excited.
Yes. Yes.
um Cool. Do you have anything more about the rating before we move on to the negatives and kind of the final rating process for these games?
Uh, Not so much, but I mean, definitely with the negatives of this one, I would have to say random encounters.
Yeah,
I
always and
hate
forever.
them.
Yep,
I hate
I
them
agree.
so much.
Yeah, I hate random encounters. They bug me very much. Like I will say with this game, it was. I mean, I could tolerate it. Everything was so good about this game that the
Hmm.
negatives didn't bring it down too much. Also, some people may not like that micromanagement and optimization involved with the characters.
Yeah.
I like that. That's not a negative for me, but I think a lot of people do kind of get turned off by that micromanagement.
I find it a little
Um,
confusing.
yeah, totally. I do think one of my biggest negatives of the game, something that really did kind of drive me nuts about it, is the Velt. I hated the way you had to deal with Gao.
Oh yeah.
So Gao is a character that learns the moves of the enemies that he fights. So Gao has this ability. You meet him on this continent called the Velt, and you meet him, and he's kind of the wild boy, and he joins
Hmm.
your party. And in order to get the most of the Gao, you have to grind the Velt. And what you do is you run around this continent, and when you come upon an enemy that you want to learn their moves, Gao has this ability on the Velt, and only on the Velt, nowhere else on the map can you do this, but he'll leap. And when he leaps, he runs away with that group of enemies. And eventually, after grinding around the Velt some more, you'll run into him again, and you'll have learned those abilities. So in order to get the best abilities, you have to grind until you just randomly happen to come across the creature you wanted the ability of. And it kind of goes to the I hate grinding, like I don't want to grind in a game sort of mentality, but you have to grind the Velt to get the most of the Gao. And I do not like that about this game. I mean, not to say you have to. I think you can
Hmm.
go a lot of this game without even using Gao,
I
but
barely ever used them.
same, like he's my least favorite character in the entire cast, to be honest with you. He had the
Hmm.
least depth to me, but if you're like the completionist type or you want to flesh it all out, like having to do that would make me so upset, you know?
Yeah. Um, yeah, I can see what you're saying. In fact, with this genre in general, occasionally some of the characters will fall by the wayside for me. I typically will always level up a core group over anybody else, unless you're given a point where you have to play as a character.
Hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Once I get my group going, I kind of roll with them mainly.
Hmm.
It kind of sucks though because you can underlevel certain characters.
Definitely.
So it's definitely something to be worried about. Yeah, it's probably one thing that I would give a knock, but I mean, it's more so a knock against the genre more so than actual the game.
Yeah, for sure. Um, I mean, that's kind of it for negatives. One thing to kind of note, I wouldn't. It's kind of hard to call it a negative because it's just kind of just a circumstance. But the SNES version of this game is considered not to really have the best translation.
Oh yeah,
So I mean,
yeah.
we're playing this as a Super Nintendo game, like this is a Super Nintendo segment of our retro gaming podcast. But I think a lot of people prefer the Game Boy Advance version because the translation is better. Or
Mm-hmm.
if you have the ability, it's recommended to do a translation patch for the ROM if you're playing it on an emulator. Just go ahead and get that translation patch because I think in the Super Nintendo version actually calls a lot of the items different things and a lot of the spells different things than what you may be used to if you've played Final
Mm-hmm.
Fantasy games prior. Or if you've played the future games prior to playing this one, like the items and spells are named a bit differently than what you may remember. But I wouldn't necessarily call that a negative. That's just kind of like the localization at the time probably wasn't as big of a priority, as it is
Mm-hmm.
now. You have much more resources and people to throw at translations for games than you used to.
Yeah.
Um, cool. So going on to like rating of this game specifically, I mean, I think it's the greatest Final Fantasy game. I know I'm not alone in saying that. I think a lot of people do think this is the greatest game of the now 15 game strong series. Um, it really shines on the Super Nintendo, which is a system with so many JRPGs. I think this is one of the best. It's gonna be really hard for me to compare it to Chrono Trigger on a list, but I think this really stands as just one of the best RPGs on the system and one of the best RPGs like of all time.
Yeah, I would follow it up, having played it recently in my later life, opposed to playing as a kid with almost no nostalgia attached to it. Originally, I'd say Final Fantasy VII would be my favorite, kind of falling into the group of most people. But that being said, having played six, with my current state and thoughts now, six might be the best one out of the series of all the ones I played, because I played a few intermittently.
Hmm.
7, 8, 10, 13, now six.
You never
Uh,
played 9?
9, I hear, is one of the best ones. I just never have picked it up.
See, nine's my second favorite Final Fantasy behind this one.
I've heard people love it. I heard people love it. So this it goes 6 and then 9 for you.
Yeah.
Squall's all right, man. He's got some all right stuff. I know
I
people
like
think
that
he's a
8
little.
does the love story. I'm a sucker for a romance, so that is cool about 8, but we'll have to talk more in depth about uh 7, 8, and 9 when we get to our PlayStation segment, because I
Yeah.
guarantee those are going to be at the top of those lists, and we will be talking at detail about those games. So, let's say we put these to our list. So, I mean, we are rating harshly these games, and we do have to put these on our list with Super Mario World, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, and Super Metroid. So currently, Super Mario World is leading the pack at number one Super Nintendo game,
Mm-hmm.
followed by A Link to the Past, and then Super Metroid is third. So now that we have 4, 5, and 6 to spare, how would you rate these games?
So personally, I would still put Super Mario at number one.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason being is that that's a universal game that'll appeal to everybody. No matter who
Mm-hmm.
you are, you can pick that up and have fun. Secondly, I would have to probably still retain Legend of Zelda. Again, because it's a simplified version of a great story. It has
Mm-hmm.
sound fundamental gameplay, genre defining. And
Mm-hmm.
then, I mean, next I'm going to have to put Final Fantasy VI. Knocking out Super Metroid. Nothing against Super Metroid, but Final Fantasy VI, being in its own, in the JRPG genre, different from the other two titles on the list.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic story, fantastic pacing. It's totally playable by anyone who's willing to put the time into that game.
Mm-hmm.
Me having just picked it up recently and being able to play right through it. Now, with the use of a guide, you can really streamline things, which is kind of how I did it. But I found that game to be fantastic. Go
So
on.
you'd put Final Fantasy VI in between A Link to the Past and Super Metroid?
Yes, currently, yes. And then
That's a spot that's so hard for me.
the three
Because
spot.
the 3 spot is really hard, because I'm gonna agree with Super Mario World and A Link to the Past is the definitive 1 and 2.
Yeah.
Because Super Mario World really showcases what the Super Nintendo can do, and it
Mm-hmm.
led the world into like this next generation console, like as king. And
Mm-hmm.
then being the Zelda dork that I am, like that game created what is my favorite series. And
Mm-hmm.
but 3, because Chrono Trigger, man, like that game is so important to me.
Yes.
But like Final Fantasy 6 is also so freaking good. Like I do want to say I want to put some thought into putting Chrono Trigger as 3 over Final Fantasy 6. I mean, what are your thoughts there?
Well, Final Fantasy VI, I feel like, I mean, not that Chrono Trigger didn't have, I mean, because it had a great thing with time travel and multiple stories and affecting the past and the future. But I feel like there was 5 stories going on in Final Fantasy VI all at once. And I feel like some of those stories inspired games that are like, not to keep bringing up Undertale, but the concept from Final Fantasy VI of there being a magic world shut out, kept away from the human world, is
Hmm.
very similar concept to me. So I feel like that, and then also a character who has a magic unlocked and within them that didn't know that they had it. All these minor stories all went on to become their own standalone games and stories in cinema. I feel like they just pulled out all the stops on Final Fantasy VI to make
Hmm.
that title story just so profound.
I think
And
they
with each
both.
character,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
oh, and I'm just with every character having their own story.
Hmm.
I felt like they just crushed it. with
Hmm.
every possible story in that game.
I think they both do things that are like stand out for the genre. I mean, they both have really fun combat. You know, Chrono Trigger with the text system and
Hmm.
how it uses enemy placement and double text, triple text, all that. And then Final Fantasy with the espers and the character abilities are all really cool. And I mean, they both have an epic story. You know, they're
Hmm.
both so even to me. You know, like I think I do put Chrono Trigger a little above, but I can see you have some really good points to why you think Final Fantasy VI would stand above it, and I guess I'm going to default to Final Fantasy VI being 3 because I have the nostalgia for Chrono Trigger and I have played Final Fantasy VI in the past, and so I'm a bit biased there, but you kind of going into these a little more fresh and still thinking that way, maybe in a testament to how these games are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I can say because of that, I can say putting Final Fantasy VI as the number 3 slot is fair.
All right, and that's bound to adjust as time goes on.
Yeah, I mean we have 25 games still to do on this list, so. But I did want to have some discussion on this because I think it's fun to see kind of the opinions on these versus what the what these bigger blog sites like IGN and whatnot are thinking about them.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
um so after number 3 being Final Fantasy VI, I guess I'm gonna have to argue that Chrono Trigger needs to go right
Yeah.
underneath it.
I agree.
Um so poor Super Metroid is just getting knocked lower and lower. And that's a fantastic game, you know, like that's crazy to say that Super Metroid is currently knocked that low on our list.
Yeah, yeah. Well, if you think about, I'm trying to think of a universal appeal in design, with ease into, and just gameplay, which is why I put Legend of Zelda and Super Mario at the top, and Final Fantasy being that I just picked it up and I felt like I could play through that whole game.
And you did it in a week.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, with the help of a guide, which does
but
help,
but
but
still, I mean that's impressive, man. Like in my adult life, there's not many games that I can say that have done that to me. So that's pretty cool. That's why I'm definitely kind of defaulting that level 3 because there's a piece of me inside that wants to argue with you for like the rest of the episode on why Chrono Trigger should be higher. But I think that's a very fair assessment of Final Fantasy VI, and yeah, I think the accessibility of that above Super Metroid. Like Super Metroid is groundbreaking and does some really cool stuff, but it's not near as accessible as these other games.
yeah, yeah. Chrono Trigger 2 is accessible. I feel like that one's very streamlined for you to be good at.
So this leads Earthbound. So personally, I want to put Earthbound as the sad last one on our
Uh,
list right now. I mean, I think it's a good game, but I think Super Metroid to me does a bit more than
yeah,
Earthbound.
I would agree with you. It does hurt my heart to put it low, but at the same time,
Yeah.
I do understand because I mean it's quirky, so that it make it that's a it's almost like a Napoleon Dynamite where it's hard to put into a category because of its quirkiness.
Yeah, definitely. I mean it's still a great game and we're at the top of the list still, you know, that's only number 6
Oh
on
yeah.
25 of the entire huge Super Nintendo catalog, you know what I mean?
Hmm.
So these are still excellent games, and I mean, I still hold a dear place in my heart for Earthbound. But I think yeah, it's going to be our number 6 game.
Yeah, yeah.
So the de facto retro radio rumble list, as it stands today on episode 2, is Super Mario World is number 1, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past is number 2, Final Fantasy VI is number 3, Chrono Trigger is number 4, Super Metroid on number 5, and then last but not least today is Earthbound at number 6.
Damn.
So, with that, I believe that will be all for today's episode of the Retro Radio Rumble. Thank you all so much for sticking around and giving us a listen. And we received a really positive kind of positive response on episode 1. We had a lot of people chime in and listen and give us some awesome feedback. So we really appreciate you guys, the listeners, for checking it out and giving us your opinions. Please take the time to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook. Facebook.com/retro.radio.rumble. At Twitter, you can add us at retro, at rumble_retro. And just subscribe and like on any of the popular podcast platforms that you guys prefer to listen to on. It really means a lot to us as we put a lot of work into this. So thank you all very much. And if you have stuck around this long, I know we kind of get pretty lengthy on these podcasts. So thank you very much for sticking around, and tune in next week where we have some other favorites. Looks like next week we're going to go over, I say next week, but I mean the next 2 weeks. I apologize for lying to you guys. 2 weeks, bi-weekly podcast. We're going to be talking about Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Finally get some fighter game up in there.
All right.
Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, and Super Mario Kart. So definitely very different games, kind of spanning some very different styles. So be excited to talk about those. Do you have anything for our lovely fans, Denny's?
Just that, thanks for checking it out. Check out the socials, and we'll definitely be tuning in 2 weeks.
All right. So long, guys. Thank you very much.